that are in the initial draft of the legislation are adequate. I wonder if he wants to speak a little bit more to that question and perhaps give the House some sense of whether there are existing standards he thinks we should be looking to in order to come up with appropriate penalties and how we might determine adequate penalties.
Honourable Member for Mission, Mascui Fraser Canyon.
Thank you, Madam President. Regarding penalties, I want to think of the worst case scenarios, and we got to think about how much we've heard so many stories for years in British Columbia and why the Collin Commission was put in place about the impact of money laundering and the billions of dollars that have been laundered into corporations, largely I would say at the provincial level, but I don't want any fees or penalties to be seen as the cost of doing business for certain corporations. So we need to look at strengthening those penalties, and I think we need to hear from a suite of experts, both in law enforcement, maybe experts from FinTract, law enforcement at CSIS, to ensure that we get this right and that we use this tool to provide some trust for Canadians in our law enforcement institutions to be able to make a difference. I don't have specifics. All I know is that at $200,000 or in some cases $5,000, that will be seen as the cost of doing business, and we want to make it actually hurt when someone tries to break the law in Canada. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Charlotte St. James, Assiniboia Headingley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I want to thank my colleague for his excellent speech. There's a number of areas of clarification in my mind that need to be addressed. Perhaps it'll be done through committee, but one is, for example, the type of asset that's caught by this legislation. So, for example, a beneficial owner is someone for whom an asset is held in trust. That could be shares of a corporation being held in trust by a shareholder for someone else, be that shareholder be an individual or a corporation, but also the assets of a corporation can be held in trust for an owner or a group of owners. So one of the things that I'd like to get clarified is, does this just apply to shares being held in trust for a beneficial owner, or does it actually apply to the assets of a corporation that are held in trust for owners? And what happens, for example, when those beneficial owners in turn decide to set up trust arrangements with other people holding their beneficial ownerships in trust for others? Secondly, there are 500,000 corporations under the CBSA. There could be literally tens of millions of these trust arrangements in existence across the country. What are the resources that will be dedicated to make sure we can track them? And finally, I was a little bit concerned, I'll wrap up now, Madam Speaker, that personal addresses will be published because most of these trust arrangements are legitimate business practices. A small number are much smaller number for money laundering. So I just want to highlight there might be.
I have to give the Honourable Member for Mission, Mascui Fraser Canyon, the time to answer.
I'd like to thank my colleague from Winnipeg for his very important question. I think one of the big gaps in this legislation is clarifying the relationship between significant interests and the role trusts play in in corporate structures at all levels of corporate registries in Canada right now, and the impact that will have on the interoperability and the overall effectiveness of a corporate registry as we move forward. The member also pointed out the significance of this registry in the context of those provincial bodies, and we need to make sure that there is interoperability, of course, to ensure its effectiveness in completing its stated goals. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The citizenship of the shareholders of a corporation. I think there should not be any legal protection offered to foreigners who invest in Canadian corporations, and we have been seeing that corporations are being incorporated but with no other purpose than to have a transaction and process that leads to nothing but tax avoidance and in some cases even money laundering. I want to touch on the thing he mentioned about the significant shareholding and the threshold, which is 25% in some jurisdiction, 10% in some jurisdiction. And as he rightly stated that, that is a loophole that can be very easily 5 people can form a corporation with 20% each, or 11 people can form a corporation. So should there be any threshold at all that prevents the disclosure of the beneficiary.
Member for Mission Mascot Fraser Canyon.
Well, I'd like to thank my colleague from Nepean on outlining the probably the issue that needs to be studied the most in this legislation, and that is significant interest. I don't have a specific answer to his question right now, but we need to have that debate in Parliament about the impact of significant interest and corporate structures, stacked ownership structures, that needs to be viewed in the light of money laundering and tax avoidance or evasion. I'll just quickly touch upon the impact of addresses as well. Another point of this bill, and it relates to citizenship. We need to clarify our charter obligations, individual privacy, but we also need to make sure and be practical that in some cases Canadian corporations are used for illicit purposes, and in some cases we should know the citizenship of those individuals who are using said corporations. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Reprise du débat, l'honorable député.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for Joliette for a little while before question period. Thank you, Madam Speaker. What do the Panama Papers, Pandora Papers, and others have in common? These are things that helped us learn about what was hidden in tax havens, these anonymous corporations where we can't even know who the owners are. All we could know was who the administrators were, and these were usually big legal or accounting firms. But because of certain legislation, we were able to flush out certain fraud artists who were trying to hide dirty money. When it's impossible for people to know what's going on in a shell corporation, a shell company, all kinds of criminal activity can take place. People who recycle or launder money in the real economy, well, even for them, we shouldn't have to count on leaks or hackers to know what's going on in these corporations. These data should be public. There's nothing like transparency to deal with fraud, and this is essentially what Bill C-42 deals with. It forces administrators of federally incorporated businesses to come clean with their information. And Canada can learn who are the real owners. There would be a public registry that anyone can consult. C-42 will provide for transparency, and that is a very good thing. The Bloc Québécois supports the principle of this bill, and I would invite all of their members to do so as well. I'm going to tell you a secret, Madam Speaker. When I saw that the government had something that was going to amend the CABA, I have to point out that property rights are within provincial jurisdiction. Every province has a securities commission. For some years now, Quebec and the provinces have been coordinating and harmonizing their legislation. Since most of the legislation is similar, all legislation in each province is recognized in other provinces. And people in any province in Quebec can work outside Quebec. And since this system works extremely well, the federal government doesn't have to get involved. And Quebec's jurisdiction are respected. Otherwise, there would be a concentration of financial activity in Toronto. But this will work only if all governments coordinate and to have harmonized legislation. And this is why I do have a concern when I see that the government wants to modify the CABA. If it acts unilaterally, as they usually do, if it does not coordinate with Quebec and other provinces, We need a similar legislation. No. We don't want Ottawa to have any pretext to try to centralize everything, as it has tried to do for decades. But when I looked at Bill C-42, I was greatly relieved. C-42 would allow the implementation of a public registry, and this will, to be transparent, reflects what people want to do in the G20. Canada seems to be acting properly, respecting everyone involved. Bravo. Quebec and the provinces have coordinated and have decided to work together, respecting everyone's independence. We all agreed to change our legislation to make sure that everyone would have the data necessary to identify real owners. In 2022, we did this in passing C-12. In 2018, they agreed on how businesses could share information with the government and how governments could make these data public. And that's what we're talking about today. No need for federal standards. No need for Ottawa to dictate to Quebec what it should do. Everything is done respectfully. The National Assembly of Quebec adopted Bill 68 and other legislation in 2018. We were the first jurisdiction in North America to bring in this kind of legislation. March 31st, 2023, it's today, in the National Assembly, that the National Assembly's legislation comes into effect. And it will be, all information will be on a business registry. Businesses will make their information available in a year. It will be working completely with C-42. The federal government is following in our steps, and provinces can either pass similar legislation, they've already done so, or they will do so. And Madam Speaker, I will allow you to move to statements by members. And thank you, Madam Speaker. I think the honourable member will have 13 minutes after question period. Statements by members.
Honourable member for Kitchener Centre.
Madam Speaker, around the world we're seeing a rise in anti-trans rhetoric and legislation. This includes in the U.S., where in 2023 alone, over 400 bills have been proposed or passed that attack trans human rights. While here at home, the rise in anti-trans hate has advocates saying it's never been as scary as it is now. We must do better, and I'm grateful to organizations like Spectrum, Waterloo Region's first ever Rainbow Community Space, who serve, affirm, and support the well-being of 2S LGBTQ+ people in my community. Former Spectrum president and trans activist Caitlin Glasson recently started a petition calling for Canada to be more open to transgender and non-binary asylum seekers who are at risk in other parts of the world. And it's been widely amplified by the trans community with over 145,000 signatures. On this Trans Day of Visibility, let's recognize how much work we need to do and celebrate the power of the trans community and having their voices heard.
The honourable member for Winnipeg North.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. Budget 2023 is one that continues to demonstrate that we have a government that truly cares about people, that we are building a stronger and healthier country, Madam Speaker. From helping people fight inflation by bringing in the grocery rebate, to introducing a national dental program, and supporting a greener economy, Madam Speaker. This year's budget reflects the interests and expectations that Canadians have of the government. Caring for people, for me, Madam Speaker, means lifting seniors and children out of poverty by increasing things such as the GIS, by increasing the Canada Child Benefit Program. It means by investing in healthcare, $198 billion over 10 years to secure healthcare services for future generations, Madam Speaker. It's about building a national child care program, Madam Speaker, a stronger economy, employing 2 million additional people. Thank you, Madam.
The Honourable Member for Saskatoon West.
Madam Speaker, soon Christians around the world will be celebrating Easter. Good Friday marks the crucifixion of Jesus Christ at the hands of the Romans. The resurrection of Christ on Easter Sunday fulfills his promise to the people of the world that he is indeed the Son and living embodiment of God on earth. All Christians, Protestants, Catholics, and Orthodox will come together over Easter weekend to celebrate the most important days in the Christian calendar. For some of us, this means attending church services. For others, it means attending a big family party. For some, like the Ukrainians fleeing the war crimes of Vladimir Putin, it will be the first Easter not in their home country, but instead here in Canada. Regardless of how we celebrate, Madam Speaker, Easter is a reminder of how Christ sacrificed his life for us and made a way for each of us to know God personally. I look forward to Easter Sunday when Christians around the world will say in Ukrainian, Christos rydaiose, he is risen. He is risen indeed.
The Honourable Member for Milton.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. A little over a decade ago, Patrick and Brian Burke launched You Can Play, a social activism campaign dedicated to the eradication of homophobia in sports, particularly in hockey, using the slogan, if you can play, you can play. Most people have also seen Pride Tape on Hockey Sticks, an initiative co-founded by Dr. Chris Wells. And Madam Speaker, these are meaningful steps in the right direction for inclusion in sport in this country and around the world for the 2S LGBTQ+ community. Unfortunately, some NHL players have recently decided not to wear Pride-themed warm-up jerseys before their games' Pride nights, and the league's Hockey is for Everyone campaign, saying it's contrary to their religious beliefs. A rainbow jersey, Madam Speaker, a simple but compassionate sign of solidarity and a way to say hockey is a sport for everyone. You matter, and you're welcome here. So while there's been a lot of progress, it's clear that there's still a lot of work to be done. Madam Speaker, I grew up Catholic and I attended Sunday school and catechism. And if I know one thing about Jesus Christ, it's that he loved everybody. And he'd be at the front line marching in pride parades if he were alive today. Sport is for everyone, Madam Speaker. And to every young player out there, I want you to say this. Regardless of your race, gender, or sexuality, hockey is a sport for you.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Grisbach.
Today, we join trans folks from across the globe in recognition of Trans Day of Visibility. From Stonewall to Edmonton, the trans community has and continues to contribute greatly to a better and more just society. They've shown us the strength of community resilience and remind us of our everlasting pursuit for justice, even as our institutions and society continue to fail them. Every member of this House has a responsibility to stand up and speak out against the bigotry that is threatening the safety of trans people across Canada and the globe. Rising violence and extreme hatred against the trans community is a gruesome reality and a threat to democracy and freedom everywhere. A truly free society is one where everyone has the freedom to be who you are, the freedom to love who you love, and the freedom to pursue happiness. The trans community has a right to joy, Madam Speaker, and this joy is under threat. We can and must do more.
The Honourable Member for Halifax.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to recognize my friend Carol Young, a community leader, women's advocate, and lifelong volunteer in Halifax who sadly passed away over the weekend. Carol is remembered for her unwavering commitment to advancing women in workforce, in boardrooms, and in politics. She worked right here on Parliament Hill for the first Trudeau government as the first female special assistant to a cabinet minister. One half of a dynamic power couple, along with her late husband, the renowned lawyer John Young, whom she met here on the Hill when he was working for Alan J. McEachern, the pair set down roots in Nova Scotia, where Carol would work on many important boards, including Dalhousie University, Neptune Theatre, and the Pier 21 Society. Carol also devoted herself to many philanthropic endeavors, including Ronald McDonald House, the Children's Discovery Center, and the Mental Health Association of Nova Scotia. She also played a key role in the creation of the IWK Children's Hospital Telethon. For all of this, she earned appointment to the Order of Canada and an honorary doctorate from St. Mary's University. She leaves behind a wonderful wonderful legacy, Madam Speaker, and I send my condolences to her family and all those whose lives she touched.
The Honourable Member for South Shore St. Margaret's.
I rise in the House because tomorrow is the 150th anniversary of the sinking of the SS Atlantic, the biggest shipwreck in Nova Scotia and the biggest marine disaster in North America before the Titanic. With nearly 1,000 people on board, the greatest passenger liner of her day left Liverpool on March 20th, 1873 for New York. Running low on coal, she diverted to Halifax to refuel. In unfamiliar waters on a stormy night with heavy seas, she went off course, hit Golden Rock, and rapidly sunk. Over 500 people lost their lives that night, including all women and children aboard but one. My communities of Lower Prospect and Terrence Bay rallied to rescue 439 survivors. They brought them into their homes and nursed the injured back to health. On this anniversary of the disaster of the SS Atlantic, we remember the tragic loss of so many lives and take inspiration from the courageous actions of the communities of Lower Prospect and Terrence Bay.
The Honourable Member for Cloverdale, Langley City.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Sects across the world and in Canada are preparing to celebrate Vaisakhi. The celebration of Vaisakhi marks the founding of the community of baptized Sikhs known as Khalsa Panth. This year, the celebration is held on April 14th. Canada is home to one of the largest Sikh diasporas in the world. More than 500,000 Canadians of the Sikh faith have helped make our country what it is today. The vibrant festival of Vaisakhi is a spring festival marking the solar new year for Sikhs and Hindus. Vaisakhi is also a time to reflect on the importance of upholding justice and promoting equality. Let us celebrate together the importance of the Sikh community within Cloverdale, Langley City, across Surrey and across Canada as well. And please join me at the Surrey Vaisakhi Parade on April 22nd. I'd like to take this opportunity to wish all those celebrating this special occasion a very happy Vaisakhi. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Oakville North, Burlington.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Canada is a global leader in the production of life-saving medical isotopes, which are used in medical imaging, cancer therapy, disease prevention, and medical device sterilization. Canada's isotopes sterilize over 25 billion pieces of medical equipment a year, 70% of the world market. I've seen our leadership firsthand at Bruce Power, who in partnership with the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation will jointly market a new isotope, lutetium-177, in support of the global fight against cancer. Earlier this week, I attended an event with the Canadian Nuclear Isotope Council launching Isotopes for Hope. Canada's leadership needed now more than ever. A roadmap to strengthen Canada's global role in the isotope supply chain to double production by 2030. Countries around the world depend on Canada for its expertise in the production of medical isotopes. Canada can support almost the entire supply chain for medical isotopes. We must remain a world leader and pursue innovative solutions to save lives. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Charleswood, St. James, Assiniboia, Headingley.
To celebrate Education and Sharing Day. Education and Sharing Day is a day established in honor of the Rebbe Menachem Mendel Schneerson, recognizing his lifelong efforts towards improving education. He was an advocate for children and spoke out about the need for each child to be given an education that would offer them the opportunities to succeed. He often spoke about the need for education to focus not only on academic achievements, but also on character building. The rabbi's emissaries established a network of several thousand Jewish schools and education centers across the globe. They sought to empower young people and inspire individuals of all ages. A high-quality education develops the mind, opens the heart, nurtures our talents, and fortifies our character. We owe a tremendous debt to Rebbe Schneerson and to all those who promote education that embraces moral and ethical values. This year, let us rededicate ourselves to teaching the love of learning that was championed by Rebbe Schneerson.
Hear, hear. The honourable member for Niagara Centre.
Madam Speaker, it is my pleasure to rise in the House today on National Indigenous Languages Day. This is a day to bring attention, Madam Speaker, to the critical endangerment of Indigenous languages and to celebrate the rich and diverse heritage they bring to our country. Today, there are at least 70 distinct Indigenous languages spoken in Canada, and every one of them are fundamental to the identity, the culture, and spirituality and self-determination of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. It is inherent, Madam Speaker, an inherent right to pass their knowledge, their stories, and their histories in their own voices to all future generations. This is a goal we're working toward in partnership through C91, an act respecting Indigenous languages to protect, preserve, and revitalize Indigenous languages throughout this great nation. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Montmagny-Lislac, Kamouraska, Rivière-du-Loup. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Our streets are becoming less and less safe. People are afraid to walk alone or take public transit. This is not what Canada is all about. Since this Prime Minister took office, violent crime has increased by 32% and gang-related crime has doubled. Instead of taking concrete action to address the problem, this government is making it worse. Thanks to its flawed legislation, dangerous criminals are on the loose, often the same day they are arrested. Crimes committed with firearms are met with little or no punishment. It is high time for a change. A Conservative government will reinstate mandatory jail time for serious violent crimes. We will put in place bail rules that will ensure that serious, repeat, and violent offenders remain behind bars while awaiting trial. A Conservative government will make sure that violent criminals stay where they belong, behind bars.
Honourable member for Fort McMurray, Cold Lake.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Our home is a haven where we feel safe, build memories, and raise our families. It is the foundation of our lives and the place where we plan our future. But for far too many Canadians, the dream of owning a home is completely out of reach. Even if someone works hard and does everything right, a home seems out of sight, and 9 in 10 Canadians that don't own a home say they never will. In 8 years under this Liberal Prime Minister, rent has doubled, mortgage payments have doubled, leaving so many to wonder how they will ever get ahead. All is not lost. Conservatives have a plan to build more homes and make housing more affordable. We will get rid of the gatekeepers that are preventing housing from being built. We will reverse the disastrous Liberal housing policies, and we will tackle record-breaking inflation and rising interest rates. Conservatives will restore the dream that home ownership is indeed possible. It's time to get to work and bring it home.
The Honourable Member for Gatineau. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I was very pleased to attend the launch of the finals of the Expo Science Hydro-Québec for the Ottawa region this morning. Over the next 2 days, more than 50 high school and college students will be exhibiting their science projects. It's inspiring, Madam Speaker. And this wouldn't be possible without the invaluable support of the teachers of the region schools. A huge thank you for sparking the interest of our young people in science. I also would like to thank Technosciences Outaouais, which is doing remarkable work to promote science, technology, and innovation. We have a great next generation for science, and I'm very proud of them. Congratulations to all of the finalists. Good luck. Thank you very much.
The honourable member for Windsor West.
Madam Speaker. Scandals in the sports world continue to plague our country. The scale of these abuses against athletes needs immediate attention. Athletes should have the right to participate in any sport free of maltreatment, abuse, or harm. Today I stand up for my constituents, some of who are survivors of abuse, and help shed light on the seriousness of the issue. I would like to thank Dr. Victoria Parashak from the University of Windsor and many other advocates and sports organizations from across Canada who are working together to ensure this government recognizes the scope, urgency, and importance of protecting our athletes from abuse in sport. They know that we need a preventative approach for justice to survivors that examines these problems systemically, not on a case-by-case basis. Together, I proudly stand with these leaders and survivors in sports to request that this government call a judicial inquiry completely independent of sport and that outlines a clear and consistent approach that is fair and immediate for these survivors. Without this transparent mechanism available in the form of a judicial inquiry, we will continue to see complaints, maltreatment, and no justice. It's time to protect our Canadian youth and athletes today.
Yes.
The Honourable Member for Manicouagan. Madam Speaker, I am the mother of a little boy who wakes up before the sun, who only likes to eat cereal and ketchup and shepherd's pie, who likes to play with little cars and bury them in my plants. He likes to put his dinosaurs in my coffee cup. He runs several kilometers around the house just to make himself laugh. He's a little boy who doesn't know fear or danger, a little boy who has never said I love you to me, but who looks at me as if all the love in the world is coming through his eyes. I'm not the mother of a different little boy, Madam Speaker. I'm the mother of a little boy with autism. A unique little boy, just like you, just like me. A little boy who, in his every move, lights up everything around him, like all autistic people. So on behalf of the Bloc Québécois, on this World Autism Awareness Day, as in every moment we are offered, let's make them shine in all their diversity. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Medicine Hat, Cardston Warner.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. On April 1st, the Liberal carbon tax will be increased to $65 a tonne. Unfortunately, that's not an April Fool's joke. This means the price of gasoline, home heating, and other fuels will rise, making it even more expensive for Canadians to get to work, heat their homes, or operate their businesses. Canadians already face a cost of living crisis and can't afford more taxes. The Parliamentary Budget Officer reports that the carbon tax will cost the average family hundreds of more dollars than they receive back, and that's tens of thousands of more dollars for Canadian ag producers and small business operators. A recent survey of my constituents indicates that 78% support removing the carbon tax. Businesses are struggling with the extra burden of this tax, some unsure if they will even be able to survive this year due to the rising costs. Overall, my riding has no faith in this Liberal government's ability to offer hope for their financial stability or future prosperity. What Canadians need, Madam Speaker, is a Conservative government that will axe the carbon tax.
Member for Vaughan Woodbridge.
Madam Speaker, in the words of the newly installed Archbishop of Toronto, His Grace Francis Leo, to our youth, do not be afraid of the world. Do not be afraid to give your life in service for others. Do not be afraid to dream big dreams and to want to transform the world. Do not be afraid to commit to Jesus and to his gospel. Do not be afraid to love the church. Madam Speaker, a week from today, Christians in Canada and around the world will observe the culmination of Lent, a time of prayer, fasting, and almsgiving that prepares us for the resurrection of Jesus Christ. From Good Friday to Easter Monday, family and friends will gather to reflect on the values of sacrifice, good stewardship, and copious love. This is a time of renewal and hope, where we give thanks for our many blessings and recommit to being there for one another, spread kindness, and yes, Madam Speaker, indulge in delicious Easter eggs. This Easter, I am thinking of the countless Christians that are persecuted around the world because of their faith. Buona Pasqua a tutti. Happy Easter. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions orales, oral questions. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
On peut imaginer la conversation.
We can just imagine the conversation. The Prime Minister. Minister, how are we going to avoid being found guilty again of breaking ethics laws? Oh, Prime Minister, I'll appoint my sister-in-law to decide, and we'll discuss every case around the dinner table. Oh, what a great idea. I love appointing members of our family and friends as independent officials to investigate us. The only problem is, after appointing 3 people who are friends and family, have we exhausted the list of friends and family members for these positions?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. The interim Ethics Commissioner is a career public servant who has served in a senior role in the Ethics Commissioner's office for more than 10 years, beginning when the Harper government was actually in office. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Liberals love to suck up to big oligopolistic corporations that raise prices on consumers and make life less affordable. They get lots of support from the NDP for this corporatist agenda. And lately, they've been on a real ride. Today, they announced that they think that there's too much competition in the wireless and in the internet business, and they've allowed for a massive merger. When will they start standing up for consumers instead of standing up for price-raising and high-cost corporate oligarchs?
The Honourable Minister for Science, Innovation and Industry.
Madam Speaker, we will take no lessons from these conservatives and from this leader, that's for sure. Madam Speaker, we listen to Canadians, and I think they should do that a bit more often. Canadians have told us one thing: they want lower prices. The way to have lower prices, Madam Speaker, is through competition. The way to have more competition is to have a strong fourth national player that will bring prices down. That's why, Madam Speaker, the transfer of license will go forward with 21 conditions. They have made a contract with Canadians which is enforceable and with penalties. That's what Canadians want. They want lower prices.
The Leader of the Opposition.
And yet their policy on energy is to deliberately raise prices. At midnight tonight, actually 12:01 to be precise, the carbon tax will rise on gas, heat, and groceries. Now, they originally said it would cost less, but just yesterday, a report from their own parliamentary budget officer demonstrated that the 80% of Canadians will pay more in tax, on average $1,500 more. Tomorrow morning, they're going to wake up to higher prices. It is April Fool's Day, and the joke will be on Canadians. Why won't they cancel this tax?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. And much as the opposite bench would like to deny it, climate change is real. And you know what, Madam Speaker, you know what else is real? The checks that are going to be arriving in people's mailboxes over the next few weeks. It'll mean $1,000 to my residents in Manitoba, Madam Speaker. Those checks will arrive quarterly. It's going to help with affordability, Madam Speaker. It's going to help with cash flow. The Conservatives are doing nothing for affordability, and they're certainly doing nothing on climate change. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
It's been 3 years since a killer went on a rampage in Nova Scotia. We now know of the incredible incompetence at the top of the RCMP that has raged on ever since the Prime Minister took office. He named an incompetent commissioner, and he's tried to destroy our national police force with deadly consequences. Worse yet, his commission ignored the victims, and he's done nothing to reverse the original cause of the violence in the first place. Will the Prime Minister reverse the damage he's done so that Canadians can live in safety and peace?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And although the work of the Commission has concluded, we know that the grief and loss of the families and communities will remain forever. Yesterday, we received the report from the Commission. It's a roadmap to pursue necessary changes, whether within the RCMP, whether with regard to semi-automatic firearms or gender-based violence. We will work closely with all involved to pursue these reforms, because that's what Canadians expect and deserve, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Yeah. On Tuesday, I said that there was a crisis with stabbings across the country. People being stabbed in broad daylight. The Prime Minister stood up and said, don't worry, he's going to ban hunting rifles, even though that it's knives that do stabbing and not hunting rifles. It's not the Inuit hunter in Nunavut who's causing stabbings in downtown Vancouver. All of these facts angered and frustrated the Prime Minister. He became visibly upset and ran out the back door. He has not been back since. The Prime Minister was obviously frightened and concerned by that debate.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition knows the rules and that we do not mention presence or absence in the House.
The question is, Is the Prime Minister okay, and will he ever be back in the House of Commons to debate me?
I have asked the honourable member to be wary of the rules, and the honourable member repeated the comments that he knows are against the rules. We will take one question out of the next round of Conservative questions. The honourable member for l'honorable député de Manicouagan.
Madame la Présidente,
Madam Speaker, the IPCC just tabled its summary report on climate change, which it described as a survival guide for humanity. Greenpeace said that this is the final wake-up call for the next 7 years, and those years are going to have an impact on millennia. Yet the federal budget still offers $37 billion in subsidies to fossil fuels. Ottawa is still trying to greenwash pollution from dirty energy. When will the federal government understand that its short-sighted budgets risk ruining the planet for millennia? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of the Environment.
Member for the question, and all members of this House know that we're working very, very hard to reduce emissions from the oil and gas sector. Madam Speaker, we are going to be capping oil and gas emissions. We will be implementing a clean fuel standard, a clean electricity standard, and Madam Speaker, we're going to be investing in carbon capture and storage, and very, very importantly, Madam Speaker, we are going to be eliminating fossil fuel subsidies. We're going to be doing that 2 years in advance of the predicted schedule.
Honorable député de Manicouagan.
Madame la Présidente, non seulement
Madam Speaker, not only does this budget not reduce fossil fuel production, it relies on climate change to extract fossil fuels from the Arctic in the future. Équiterre said that they're deeply concerned about planned investments for future offshore oil and gas development in the Arctic. Greenpeace said that they remain concerned about new subsidies to oil and gas companies who are already making money hand over fist. When will Canada stop dragging the world to ruin for oil companies' profits? The Honourable Minister of Tourism. Madam Speaker, I'd like to thank my honourable colleague for the question. If we look at the facts, our government has already invested over $100 billion in the clean economy of this country. In the budget tabled this week, we are betting on increasing clean electricity capacity throughout the country. We're going to use hydrogen to have another source of clean energy. We are here to build the economy of the future with Canadian workers, and we will continue to use
the honourable member for New Westminster Burnaby.
With increased prices, Canadians are turning to this government to make their lives more affordable. But the Liberals are abandoning families over and over. They've approved a merger between Rogers and Shaw, which means Canadians are going to pay more for cell phone and internet. And we already pay among the highest prices in the world. Liberals are letting businesses get rich on the backs of Canadian families. Why did the government abandon Canadians this way?
The
Honourable Minister of Innovation. Madam Speaker, I thank my colleague for his question, but I think he missed this morning's press conference. What we said this morning is that Canadians asked us for one thing, which was to lower prices for telecommunications in Canada. One way to do that is to have competition, and that means we need a national fourth player. Not only will we have a fourth player, we imposed 21 conditions with an unprecedented measures for Canadians, and this will lower prices in Canada. Thank you.
For Windsor West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I know the minister has said he's going to watch this deal, a Frankenstein deal, like a hawk, but he's left Canadian consumers to the buzzards. In fact, this minister has given the green light to Rogers and at the same time given the red light to his own industry committee and to the Competition Bureau that's been opposed to this. For decades, Liberal and Conservative governments have allowed these massive telco companies to make huge profits off the backs of hardworking Canadians. This is a disaster that will end with less competition, massive layoffs, and higher prices. Why have have the Liberals thrown in the towel, sided with the telco CEOs, and are sticking Canadian families with higher prices and the bell?
The Honourable Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry.
Madam Speaker, I have enormous respect for my colleagues, but we gave the red light. We did not approve the transfer of license from Shaw to Rogers, Madam Speaker. That was very clear what we did. Instead, we listened to Canadians, something that everyone in this House should do. The Canadians have told us one thing: bring prices down, more competition, and the way to do that in Canada is to have a fourth national player, Madam Speaker. That's why we impose conditions, because we want lower prices for Canadians, and we'll be watching them like a hawk, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Dauphin, Swan River, Nipawin.
Madam Speaker,
the Honourable Member for Dauphin, Swan River, Nipawin.
Point of order.
I did advise the members that I was going to take the next question out of the members, and I'm taking it out because the next question would be then. One moment. As the members know, it is the prerogative of the chair to determine who the next speaker is, and my prerogative is to choose the Honourable Member for Dauphin, Swan River, Nipawin.
Madam Speaker, the Liberals are tripling their carbon tax, and tonight at midnight they will carry out their plan by raising the carbon tax again. Gas is going up, home heating is going up, and groceries are going up. Gladys emailed me the other day saying she can't afford this tax hike. We cannot afford more useless taxes, she said. Will the Liberals stand up for Canadians like Gladys and cancel their plans to increase the carbon tax tonight at midnight?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. The honourable member is from my home province of Manitoba, and he will know that Manitobans will receive $1,000 in climate rebate checks over the next year. They'll receive those checks quarterly, Madam Speaker. But the honourable member also will know that there's a cost of climate change. We in Manitoba have had 2 1 in 300-year floods costing $1 billion each. Agriculture has been dramatically impacted, Madam Speaker. We've had 1,700 people driven from their homes in floods, Madam Speaker. There's a cost to climate change, and we are addressing.
Honourable Member for Peace River, Westlock. I know the writing of the Honourable Member. The Honourable Member for Cypress Hills, Grasslands.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. As farmers look in seeding, input costs are top of mind. They've already been losing tons of money under the carbon tax, but the Liberals are going to raise it again at midnight tonight. What makes it worse is that the Minister of Agriculture just voted this week against an exemption for on-farm fuels. Even the Liberal chair for the Agriculture Committee voted with Conservatives. He gets it. So why does the Minister keep voting against farmers and support increasing the carbon tax at midnight tonight?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Agriculture.
To hear my colleague talk about input costs. Input costs have risen, and not because of any taxes, just because of demand. And I hope that the honourable member will support the budget as we have increased interest-free advance payment programs up to $350,000, something their members have supported in the past, and I hope that they'll support the budget.
The Honourable Member for Peace River, Westlock.
Madam Speaker, Conservatives know that technology, not carbon taxes, will improve our environment. And yet, every time Conservatives question the carbon tax or point out the costs, Liberals stand out and point out some person who's lost their house in a recent fire, flood, or hurricane as a reason to raise the carbon tax. The carbon tax will only make these people poorer. And now the Liberals tell us that effective tonight, they will be raising the carbon tax again. When will they cancel this disastrous plan?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And again, as I said yesterday, something's not sinking in. Actually, the climate rebate will make 8 out of 10 families better off. That is in PBO report, Madam Speaker. But, Madam Speaker, you know what won't leave people better off is investing in cryptocurrency. I gave the Leader of the Opposition 2-3 times to apologize for his very reckless advice to Canadians, Madam Speaker. But it really underlines, Madam Speaker, that the opposition has no plan for the economy, no plan for the environment, and certainly no plan for climate change.
The Honourable Member for Oshawa.
Madam Speaker, while the Prime Minister stays in swanky $6,000 a night hotel, struggling with just one butler, Sue, a senior in my riding, sees herself working 3 days a week. Why? Because this costly NDP Liberal coalition is set to raise their carbon tax again at midnight, meaning that Sue and all Canadians are going to pay more for heating, eating, driving, and living. Perhaps they should focus on a real climate plan instead of punishing Canadians with a carbon tax. Why won't this costly coalition...
The Honourable Secretary to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Well, Madam Speaker, it's really puzzling. Every single person on that side of the aisle campaigned in 2021 on putting a price on pollution. Stephen Harper was in favor of a carbon tax before he was against it. The member for Wellington-Halton Hills made it the centerpiece of his leadership campaign in 2017. And the MP for Pitt Meadows, Maple Ridge, as a member of the BC government, actually introduced the first carbon price in North America. Madam Speaker, the Conservatives need to stop flip-flopping, get serious about climate change, and present their own plan.
The Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent. Madam Speaker, tonight at midnight, it's going to be very bad news for Canadians. The Liberal carbon tax is going to go up. And this will have a direct impact on all Canadian families, as demonstrated yesterday by the Parliamentary Budget Officer. It will cost more for transportation, food, heating. Why is the government punishing Canadian families and workers yet again? The Honourable Minister of Tourism. Madam Speaker, my honourable colleague knows full well that this does not apply to Quebec. Quebec is a leader when it comes to managing clean energy. What we can say is that every time we've lowered taxes on workers, what the Conservatives did, what did they do? They voted against it. They voted against lower taxes for workers, against reducing taxes for Canadians. In this budget, we already know they're going to vote against workers. They're the ones who are voting against them, and we're supporting them. The Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent. This government clearly demonstrated that it's not in contact with reality on the ground. There's a transportation group well established in Quebec that said that March 15th last year in an interview with the Journal du Québec that it's going to have a direct impact on British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba. Not only do they not know what they're talking about, but it's going to cost more for all Canadians, including Quebecers. The Honourable Member for Trois-Rivières. Or rather, sorry. What should be clearly said for Canadians is that climate change has a cost. We remember the fires at Fort McMurray. We remember the flooding in Calgary. We remember the flooding from one end of the country to the next. We need to fight climate change. And the best mechanism that we have in our system is to have a price on pollution so that we can fight climate change. Economists say so. That's what we're implementing, and we're going to fight climate change. The Honourable Member for Trois-Rivières. Madam Speaker, if there's one position that should be above any appearance of conflict of interest, it's the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner. The Liberals have proven yet again that they have not a shred of judgment by appointing the minister's sister-in-law on an interim basis. We're not questioning this person's competence or probity. The cabinet is at fault, however, each and every single one of them, for choosing a family member to fill this position. The appearance of a conflict of interest is obvious. Do they even know what one is? Let's ask the Liberals to reconsider this appointment. Will they?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, Madam Speaker, I would emphasize the interim Ethics Commissioner is a career public servant who has served in a senior role in the Ethics Commissioner's office for more than 10 years. Madam Speaker, that's beginning when the Harper government was actually in office.
Le député de Trois-Rivières.
Président, ça s'ajoute à une liste.
Madam Speaker, this is just one more in a long list of Liberal ethical lapses. For the Chinese interference file, they appointed the Prime Minister's cottage neighbour as special rapporteur. For the Ottawa Protest Convoy Commission, they appointed a former Liberal employee. Today, as Ethics Commissioner, they appoint sister-in-law of a Liberal minister. No one's questioning the competence of these individuals, but why is it that every single Liberal appointment out of 39 million Canadians, is it always someone with Liberal connections?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, Madam Speaker, once again, what I'd like to be able to do is put an emphasis on the importance of recognizing the fine work that our civil servants do, and just say that interim ethics commissioner that's being referenced is a career public servant who has served in a senior role in the ethics commissioner's office for more than 10 years, beginning when the Harper government was actually in office, Madam Speaker. We owe a great deal to our professional civil servants. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Bay of Quinte.
Madam Speaker, Canadians pay the highest cell phone prices in the world. In fact, Rogers Telecommunications is the most expensive telecommunication carrier in the whole of the world. How expensive? 3 times as expensive as Australia, twice as expensive as the US and Europe. The Rogers-Shaw deal will only make the priciest company and the most biggest only bigger. We need more competition in Canada, which means not just a 4th carrier, but 40 carriers to supply more choice to Canadians and lower prices. When will this minister get serious about competition instead of pandering to just one monopoly?
Yeah. The Honourable Minister of Science, Innovation and Industry.
Madam Speaker, I'm very pleased for the question of my colleague. Perhaps he did not fully listen to the press conference this morning because, in fact, if he looks at the contract, the prices that you see in Quebec, which are on average 20% lower than in the rest of Canada, now will have to be offered in Ontario, in Manitoba, in British Columbia, in Alberta. In Western Canada, Madam Speaker, in addition to that, we got commitments to have a headquarter in Alberta, in Calgary, and 3,000 new jobs in Western Canada. Canadians know that we have their back, and Western Canadians understand that.
The Honourable Member for South Shore, for South Shore St. Margaret's.
In fact, Videotron's prices are higher than Freedom. So if Liberals really believed in competition, they would have let a competitive bidding process happen for Freedom. These Liberals are in the back pocket of Rogers. They allowed Rogers to ignore 3 higher bidders for Freedom. These Liberals in PMO were lobbied more than 60 times by Videotron and Rogers during the sale process, but did not meet once with any other bidder. Why did Rogers get privileged access to these Liberals that other bidders did not?
Honourable Minister for Innovation, Science and Industry.
Madam Speaker, I have enormous respect for my colleague and my critic, but one thing you would know as the regulator, you don't meet with the parties, Madam Speaker. That's a basic principle in due process. You don't meet with the parties, Madam Speaker. But what Canadians understood this morning, and particularly Western Canadians, is that we have their back, Madam Speaker, because what they want is to have lower prices. The way to do that is to have competition, and the way to do that is for a 4th national player. For members on the other side who may not have a chance, read the contracts with Canadian. That's the way that you bring lower prices in Canada.
The Honourable Member for South Shore St. Margaret's.
Minister only needs to check the lobbyist registry to see more than 65 meetings with his department and PMO. In December, this Liberal minister said he would not rule on the sale until the legal challenges were over. There is a legal challenge before the CRTC currently on this deal when Rogers providing preferential rates to Videotron for access to their network that no other cell phone provider can get. Why has this minister flip-flopped on his commitment to wait for the legal challenges to be over? Is it because Rogers set today as the deadline?
The Honourable Minister.
Madam Madam Speaker, I'm so happy that my colleagues asked questions, by the way. I look forward to more questions because one thing that people at home understand is that we're fighting at every step of the way to bring prices lower in Canada, Madam Speaker. What we have achieved today is a new chapter in telecom in Canada. For the first time in Canada's history, more than 150 years, you have binding legal commitments by the telco in a contract with Canadians to bring prices lower in Canada, Madam Speaker. And this is this government who did that. Canadians know we have their back. We'll fight for them at every step of the way.
Honorable député de Montmorency, Lillet, Kamouraska, Rivière-du-Loup.
Madame la Présidente, aujourd'hui, le ministre.
Madam Speaker, today the Minister of Innovation and Industry announced the merger between Rogers and Shaw in telecommunications. And Videotron, another company involved, has to lower its prices in Quebec, but has imposed no other conditions in other businesses involved in this transaction. Why? The Honourable Minister. I thank my colleague for his question. It's relatively simple. When one's the regulator and there's two parties, that's where you can get commitments from Videotron and Rogers. But Canadians understand that if we have pressure on prices with Videotron in Western Canada, it will lead other telecommunications companies to lower their prices as well, because we know it's by increasing competition that we can lower prices. And that's exactly what we did for Canadians today.
Honourable member for Timmins, James Bay.
Madam Speaker, I've been speaking with energy workers, miners, auto workers, innovators who are more than ready to make Canada a world leader in clean energy. But to get cheap and renewable energy to market requires massive investments in the national energy grid. Now, New Democrats have worked with this government, and we have pushed this government to get serious about sustainable jobs that are tied to obligations for good union wages and apprenticeships. So what kind of funding will the government put in place to build the electricity grid that Canadians need for sustainable 21st century?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Natural Resources.
Madam Speaker, I'm very happy that the member opposite asked that question, because this budget that we tabled this week shows exactly our commitment to a strong, sustainable electrical grid. And we know that union workers, good-paying jobs are part of that work that we need to get done. We are supporting strong, sustainable jobs right across this country, and we know that our union workers are at the backbone of the work we need to do.
The Honourable Member for Victoria.
Madam Speaker, Canadians want to see their government take leadership on tackling the climate crisis and creating good union jobs. So New Democrats forced the Liberals to do just that in this year's budget. But more needs to be done. For 8 years, the Liberals have missed the mark by handing out billions to rich oil and gas CEOs who are jacking up prices for people and polluting our planet. So will the Liberals finally stand up to big oil, eliminate fossil fuel subsidies, and create a green industrial strategy?
The Honourable Minister of Labour.
Madam Speaker, I think the budget speaks for itself. I would say forced is a little harsh. Some of us have been on this for quite some time in making sure that workers are at the center of this energy transition that's occurring. That involves not only the building up of renewables, but also in lowering emissions in the oil and gas sector itself. It is Canada's largest industry. It is something that we cannot ignore. And the only ones who know how to lower emissions and the only ones who know how to build up renewables are the workers in those industries. Not only do we support them, but we will insist that they lead this transition everywhere from across this country. Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Honourable Member for Châteauguay-Lacolle.
Transgender Day of Visibility, let us stand up for the protection and promotion of the human rights of people in Canada who are transgender, queer, non-binary, and two-spirit. Can the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Women and Gender Equality and Youth share what our government is doing to uplift transgender voices and be allies to the transgender community?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
I thank the Honourable Member for her question. On this day, I'm thinking of Emma Wakelin, a trans woman who shared that it feels like every day we awake to a new law being proposed that is stripping us of our human rights, or more violence that extinguishes yet another life. As the trans community faces attacks against their identity, their dignity, and their existence, We, as a government, will continue to stand with them today and every day. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member for Lakeland. The honourable member for Lakeland.
Liberals chose a top minister's family member as the interim ethics commissioner. Of course, they give millions of tax dollars and contracts to close friends and staff's relatives, and this prime minister is the only one ever to break ethics laws twice. So his MPs have too, 4 more times for vacations and perks for their pals. You know, after 8 years, Canadians have never struggled so much, but Liberals have never had it so good. So is that why the Liberals thought the Canadians wouldn't see their ethics pick as anything other than trying to cover their own butts in the future?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. It's actually a very simple answer for the member opposite. The interim ethics commissioner is a career public servant who has served in a senior role in the ethics commissioner's office for more than 10 years. And that began, Madam Speaker, when the Harper government was actually in office.
Honourable member for North Okanagan, Shuswap.
We should all remember clam scam, when the then fisheries minister was found guilty of the ethics breach for awarding a $24 million license to a company to be ran by his wife's cousin. Wow. Now the Liberals have appointed the same cabinet minister's sister-in-law as the ethics commissioner. Really, Madam Speaker, through you, can they only find family and insiders willing to work for them? Or is this another attempt to censor disclosure of their ongoing ethics issues? Which is it?
Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. The Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs recused himself from all deliberations and decisions related to the appointment of the interim Ethics Commissioner.
The Honourable Member for Wellington, Halton Hills.
Speaker, members of this House have worked for years on funding and governance for the Great Lakes Fisheries Commission. As a result, the budget last year promised $44.9 million to DFO for the Commission. But every step of the way, it seems like DFO is obstructing the will of Parliament. Last year, it dragged its heels in transferring that money to the Commission. When will the President of the Treasury Board crack the whip and ensure that DFO complies with the will of Parliament and with ensuring best practices on governance?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, it's interesting that the Conservatives actually raised this question because it was in fact the Conservative members who underfunded and did not increase funding to the Great Lakes fishery. But it's a good news, Madam Speaker, in this budget we corrected the previous mistakes of Conservatives. They can continue to heckle me because they don't like the facts. The fact that we are actually investing in our Great Lakes, we're going to continue to protect them, while Conservatives allowed them to be underfunded and not take the protection of our Great Lakes seriously.
The Honourable Member for Wellington, Halton Hills.
Madam Speaker, another question. In the year before Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Canada was spending 1.28% of GDP on defence. According to NATO last week, in the year since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Canada spent 1.29% of GDP. I read the budget document, but I could not find any information about defence expenditure as a percent of GDP over the next 5 years. Will the government commit to providing this very important information to this House as soon as possible?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Defence.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank the member opposite for the question. The Canadian Armed Forces plays an essential role in defending Canadians and supporting global security. We have been consistent in supporting their work, starting with our 2017 defence policy, which increased spending by over 70%. In the past year, we have made new investments in Canadian national defence totaling more than $55 million, Madam Speaker. We're also undertaking a review of our defence policy in the face of changing global environment. Rest assured, we will keep making necessary smart investments into our forces. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Thérèse de Blainville. Madam Speaker, this budget proves that Ottawa has learned nothing from its mistakes. if it learned anything from the pandemic, it's just how EI abandons workers. Ottawa has been promising to reform EI since 2015. Most people who lose their jobs will find themselves with nothing. Seasonal workers, independent workers. Why has the government refused to help these people who are losing their jobs?
Secretary.
Madam Speaker, Budget 2023 invests in seasonal workers, so they have 5 additional weeks of coverage for a total of 45 weeks. Also in Budget 2023, we propose establishing a new independent tripartite Board of Appeal to hear cases regarding employment insurance claims. We know Canada's EI system is complex, and that's why we're focused on improving it. In the past 2 years, Madam Speaker, the Minister has led more than 35 virtual national and regional roundtables with workers, with employers, and academics. EI reform is a priority of this government, Madam Speaker. We are on it, and we will get it done. Thank you.
The Honourable Member. Madam Speaker, all Ottawa learned from the pandemic, all it got was a debt. Now, Ottawa should have a $24 billion surplus in the EI kitty. This from workers' contributions. But the government, why doesn't it use this to reform EI? It's taking workers' money to pay for their debt contracted during the pandemic. Why not use this money to protect them instead of paying down their pandemic debt at workers' expense?
Madame la Présidente, nous respectons.
Madam Speaker, we respect workers a great deal, and during the pandemic, we used every EI system. The minister decided to modernize the system, modernize the EI system. Madam Speaker, we're continuing the work. We should have a solid plan to help workers.
Rocky Ridge.
Madam Speaker, the budget still allows the automatic tax increase to take place tonight on beer, wine, and spirits. Under this Liberal government, simple pleasures like enjoying beer with friends after work or a bottle of wine over dinner with a loved one have become unaffordable luxuries for working Canadians. Will the government commit today to support my bill, C-266, and cancel the automatic annual tax increase on beer, wine, and spirits?
The Honourable Minister of Tourism.
Madam Speaker, I've said it in this House already this week, and I'll say it again. We listened to Canadians. We worked with the industry. We worked with our Liberal caucus that leaned in on this issue. And Madam Speaker, we are going to pause the escalator tax on beer, wine, and spirit for 1 year at 2%. Madam Speaker, it was going to be less than a cent for a can of beer. Now it's going to be even less per can of beer. Madam Speaker, we're with the tourism industry. We're with this sector. We're going to support them. We've heard from Canadians. We made the right move.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Rocky Ridge.
Madam Speaker, we're in the middle of an affordability crisis. Any tax increase is too much. The tax was too high to begin with. There is no room for any more tax. The budget adds $4,200 in new costs for every Canadian family, more spending, more taxes, more debt. That means more inflation. Canadians can't even afford basic necessities like food, housing, and transportation. And tonight, the tax on beer, wine, and spirits is going up, just like it does every year automatically under this government. Why won't this Liberal government commit today that it will cancel the automatic annual tax increase on beer, wine, and spirit?
Honourable Minister of Tourism.
Madam Speaker, the Conservative opposition has a golden opportunity to support Canadians in a time of high inflation by supporting our budget. Madam Speaker, they have no record to stand on when it comes to taxes. When we lowered not once, not twice, but 3 times taxes on middle-class Canadians, how did the Conservatives vote? Against. When we reduced taxes on workers, Madam Speaker, how did the Conservatives vote? Against. When we lowered taxes across the board, Madam Speaker, once again, they voted against. They've got a phobia of us supporting Canadians. Thank goodness we've got Canadians' backs.
The Honourable Member for Lanark, Frontenac, Kingston.
Madam Speaker, the Immigration Minister's program to admit the families of language and cultural advisors who assisted our troops in Afghanistan has such rigid criteria that it will freeze out almost everybody it should be helping. For example, only those who were still in Afghanistan after July 22nd, 2021 are eligible. So this rules out the Afghans who were in the most dangerous parts of the country and who therefore had to flee their homes before the Taliban overran their regions. These family members are now trapped in third countries and are in danger of being transported back to Afghanistan, where they will be killed. Will the minister change these restrictive criteria to fix the mess he's created?
Excellent. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Immigration.
Madam Speaker, I want to say thanks to the member for his question and actually his advocacy. You know, I said it in the House, and I'll say it again today, because if it was a matter of will, there would be 40,000 Afghan refugees here already. But we know that in the reality that everything that has been happening, there's been challenges and obstacles, Madam Speaker, and we're working very hard in addressing those through, for instance, Bill C-41. You know, there's numbers of factors, Madam Speaker, that we do not fully control, and that is a safe passage. Merci.
The Honourable Member for Pierrefonds-Dollard. Madam Speaker, Canada's priorities around innovation and the economy are evolving as we continue to give pride of place to clean growth, good jobs, and investing for the future. Budget 2023 contains new measures that show the importance this government attaches to innovation, science, and industry. Can the minister highlight the measures for stimulating the economy, helping the environment, and creating good quality jobs? The Honourable Minister. I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for an excellent question, and let me discuss these measures because the Honourable Member is quite right. We do have, for example, a manufacturing technology credit, credit for clean hydrogen, credit for electricity, but what I would like to highlight, and the people I'd like to thank, are Canadian workers because of their savoir-faire, their expertise. We will be scoring record investments. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Madam Speaker, the cover-up continues. It's been a month since the Prime Minister's National Security Advisor and the Director of CSIS committed to providing the dates upon which the Prime Minister was briefed about Beijing's election interference. 1 month later, and still no response. All the Prime Minister needs to do is check his calendar. When will the Prime Minister stop the obstruction, stop the cover-up, and give us the dates?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, on the contrary, the PROC committee has been working diligently on this issue, continuing to hold more meetings, to bring in more witnesses as opposition members have requested, and we support that. Madam Speaker, we'll continue to work with the committee to find the most appropriate time, because the committee has other business as well, but this is a top priority to ensure that we are dealing with the issues of foreign interference, and we'll continue to work hard on that.
Bravo. Good. Honorable Député de Mégantic-L'Érable.
The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Madam Speaker, the Liberals are now champions of involving family members in appointing them. But there's someone in the Prime Minister's office who thought it would be a good idea to make the sister-in-law of a Liberal minister interim ethics commissioner. When will the Prime Minister end his hypocrisy and put an end to this appointment, the appointment of the sister-in-law of his best friend?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Just to emphasize once again that the Interim Ethics Commissioner is a career public servant who has served in a senior role in the Ethics Commissioner's office for more than 10 years, beginning when the Harper government was in office. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Member for Malpeque.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, families in my riding in Malpeque are benefiting from the important and significant savings thanks to our government's early learning child care program. But they are concerned that the future of another government, like the one that campaigned against our child care program, would cut the program. Can the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Family, Children and Social Development highlight to this House how it is supporting families across PEI and also how we are progressing in enacting this important social program into legislation?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I want to thank the member from Malpeque for his question and his hard work for families. Madam Speaker, I'm so glad to report that Prince Edward Island, as well as provinces and territories across the country, are taking important steps to make childcare affordable for Canadian families. In fact, PEI announced that they cut fees by 50% last December. Daycare fees are coming down, new spaces are being created, and wages are increasing for early childhood educators. We know how critical this is because the childhood educator workforce are the foundation of our system. Madam Speaker, we need to make sure that the people who take care of our children are respected and well compensated.
The Honourable Member for Winnipeg Centre.
Madam Speaker, the Mass Casualty Commission released a scathing report yesterday. It made clear that gender-based violence is not treated with the urgency and seriousness it deserves. To save lives, police must change the way they respond to reports of gender-based violence. We cannot remain idle. Lives are at risk. This government has an obligation to act with meaningful police reform, including addressing the culture of systemic racism within the RCMP. Will the Liberals implement these recommendations without delay? Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
I thank my colleague for the question. Of course, the tragic events in Nova Scotia nearly 3 years ago, devastated the nation. Our government is working hard to ensure that every woman has the support they need and a place to sleep each and every night. We continue to make investments to ensure that is the case, including in the budget just announced the other day with $160 million starting this year for women's programs to ensure we're supporting shelters and women.
The Honourable Member for Richmond-Arthabasca. Madam Speaker, we learned that the Governor General spent $700,000 for a 4-day trip to Germany, $75,000 for 4 nights in the most luxurious hotels. And you could add this to $80,000 spent for meals aboard a plane during a trip to the Middle East. This means $2,600 for food per person on the plane. This is indecent, Madam Speaker. Can the Prime Minister tell us if he approved of these expenditures? And if not, what has he done to put an end to this squandering of funds once and for all? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Madam Speaker, it's very important to remember that the Governor General was on a trip, and what was spent for this trip was similar to what was spent for former governors general. But, Madam Speaker, we must acknowledge that when a representative of our nation travels with a delegation and works on several files, well, I can tell you that we are aware of this, as is the Governor General. And we will continue to watch expenses. And that is all the time we have for question period today.
Fort McMurray Cold Lake on a point of order.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Today during question period, the member from Pickering-Uxbridge said, and I quote, "I'm very concerned about the health of your baby." To myself during question period, an absolutely inappropriate and unparliamentary term, and I'm quite frankly, I'm proud to be here 32 weeks pregnant, fighting for my constituents, and I demand
The Honourable Member for Pickering-Uxbridge is rising on the same point of order.
Speaker, I am absolutely disgusted that the member opposite would outright lie, and yes, I am saying outright lie. I absolutely said that.
We do not use that language. We do not use that language in the House, as the Honourable Member well knows. Same thing can be said in different ways. The Honourable Member on her point of order.
What the exchange that happened was the member opposite said to me, you know, you don't have to be so mean all the time. And I responded, I said, like I care about your opinion of me. And Madam Speaker, for the member to actually use such a disgusting lie to try to defame me.
The honourable member will be invited to rethink her choice of words, please. The honourable member will be invited to exercise judgment in the use of words, and please consider that that is not a parliamentary acceptable word. And I would invite her to apologize and retract that word from the record. The honourable member for Pickering Uxbridge.
Madam Speaker, I'll withdraw the word, but the sentiment remains that absolutely did not.
Withdraw the words. Order. This will be looked at in the Hansard to answer the honourable member for Fort McMurray Cold Lake, and we will get back to the honourable member on what happened.
Point of order, Madam Speaker.
Oui, l'honorable député de Mégantic-Clairable.
The honourable member for Mégantic-Clairable. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, during question period, you made a decision to withdraw a question from the official opposition. Without calling into question your decision, Madam Speaker, it's the application of the decision that I'd like to obtain clarification from the table. In your hands, you have a list that helps guide your decisions. You're announcing the MPs who will speak. I don't think there's any rule in the House where it says that you can decide to withdraw a particular question based on a list provided to you, because it's a list that is an indication to help the work of the House. So I'd like the table to specify exactly how to proceed if ever a similar situation happens again. I think we need to know, because it created, as you've noticed, Madam Speaker, it created some discomfort among the opposition members. We want to satisfy the rules, follow them, but we need to have specifications on how these decisions will be applied in the future. Thank you.
I am sorry, I didn't hear what was said. The honourable member for Fort Lake, Cold Lake, on a point of order.
I think this is absolutely shameful. The comments that were just made by the member from Pickering Uxbridge yet again denigrate women, and we need to be supporting women in politics, not doing things like that. I asked for an apology. She has called me a liar in this chamber 4 times now today. This is absolutely inappropriate, and I demand an apology.
Member for Fort Lake, Cold Lake, Fort McMurray Cold Lake. We will listen. I didn't hear right now. I was discussing. I don't dispute it. I'm just saying that we will look in the Hansard and we will get back to the honourable member on what is found. I cannot rule on this right now. I have to wait until we look at what the Hansard and the tapes will tell us. The honourable member for Haldimand Norfolk first, and then the honourable member.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak.
Just say it.
That is, I'm just looking for the mic.
She said it backwards. She said Haldimand Norfolk.
Haldimand
Norfolk, yes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, justice does not only have to be done, it has to be seen to be done in order to uphold the dignity of this House.
That's right.
Madam Speaker, when a member 4 times says something so patently offensive as calling another honourable member a liar, it must be dealt with. Our member said it once and was removed from this House. Yeah. Justice has to be seen to be done in this House, Madam Speaker.
Member for Elgin, Middlesex, London on her point of order.
And I was actually just the words from the member from Halton and Norfolk. She said it very well, and I do really appreciate that. I just want to second that. Thank you.
Great job.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Madam Speaker, I think that prior to the interaction that had taken place, you were making a ruling on another point of order. I think it's best that you conclude that point of order. I know that there's 1 or 2 members that might want to address the second point of order that's raised, but maybe if we can put to rest the first point of order, and then we'll go on to the second.
Oui, effectivement, je vais.
Yes, I will continue with the point of order raised by the member for Mégantic l'Érable on question period. The lists provided by parties are an indication, but they don't oblige the Speaker to follow them. It's true that it's an indication. I conferred with the table when I decided to withdraw the question, and there was an exchange with the people who work with the official opposition whip to arrive at an agreement. But it's really at the discretion of the Speaker how to withdraw or not a question in the order of questions. The Honourable Member. I understand, Madam Speaker, but what I really wanted to know is we had a member who rose to be recognized, and we had no other member, and you recognize the next one on the list. That's why I think it's important to have the specification. Because the member we had chosen to ask the question had, in my opinion, the right to do so, because he was the only member who rose at that time to ask the question. The list is an indication, so you couldn't ask the next person to rise instead of the one who was there, because in theory, the list doesn't exist in the rules. Thank you, Madam Speaker. The member is entirely correct. It's true that there's no list in principle. It's a convention between the parties. So that's why we're resolving that with the whip's office. Thank you very much.
On the other point of order, the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to, the Honourable Member for Longueuil-Charlemagne. It's easier for me.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And I just wanted to clarify on the original point of order. I was literally sitting in front of the member and heard the exchange, and I can attest that what the member from Pickering said was not what was said by the member opposite. So I can attest the member in no way ever referenced, but I understand.
Okay. Well, we're not going to debate what is the initial point of order was, which was about what was happened during the questions, but more on the use of the word liar or lies afterwards, which is really and truly the unparliamentary part of the issue, because on the exchange that happened during question period, I don't know. I didn't hear it. We'll have to go back to both the tapings and the Hansard. So that we had. No, I'm talking about the initial comments. I'm not talking about the word lies. Everybody heard those. We all heard those. And those are certainly not parliamentary language. L'honorable député.
The honourable member for Pontiac. On the same point of order? Yes. On this point of order, I was there myself too, like my colleague, and I heard the words, I'm the mom of twins. I was pregnant too. I don't understand how that could be used for political ends. That's disappointing. We're not debating the matter at the origin of the point of order. We're debating what followed, and that's what we'll have to resolve. I'll get back to you in a few seconds.
Bravo, et nous reviendrons. We will continue the debate and we will come back to the honourable member with a resolution. I have mine. Okay. Orders of the day. No, routine.
Daily routine of business.
Daily routine of okay. Tabling of documents. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Pursuant to Standing Order 36.8a, I have the honour to table in both official languages the government's responses to 10 petitions. These returns will be tabled in an electronic format.
Dépôt de projet de loi émanant du...
Introduction of government bills.
Déclaration.
Statements by ministers.
Rapport de délé...
Reports from interparliamentary delegations.
Presenting reports from committees, the Honourable Member for Elgin, Middlesex, London.
Thank you so much. And Madam Speaker, it is honestly my privilege to put in front of you, present the reports, both copies signed. The sixth report of the Standing Committee on the Status of entitled A Step-by-Step Approach to Supporting the Mental Health of Young Women and Girls in Canada. This was one of the most difficult studies, I think, that we've done in my years here in the House of Commons, and it was done with incredible collaboration from the staff, including Alexi, Dominique, and Claire, and our new clerk, Danielle, the incredible staff that we have, to our members of Parliament that worked on this, and to everybody in the room, but to most of all, it was to the members of Parliament, the 11 that sat around that table, to make sure that we were putting a study that was good for women and girls, that we worked to make sure the recommendations are things that should be listened to. So I would like to thank my incredible colleagues for putting forward this unanimous report and putting the welfare of women and girls first. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Great job, Karen, as always.
Introduction of private members' bills. First reading of Senate public bills. Motion.
Motions.
Motions. Présentation de...
Presenting petitions.
Honourable member for Châteauguay-Lacolle.
Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have the honour of presenting a petition today signed by the citizens of Châteauguay-Lacolle with 180 signatures on businesses based in Canada that contribute to violating human rights and the perpetration of environmental destruction throughout the world. Unfortunately, people who protest against those violations and defend rights are often harassed, attacked, or killed. The petition asks the House of Commons to adopt legislation on reasonable diligence for human rights and environment, which would require that businesses make announcements about expected impacts throughout their worldwide supply chain. Businesses should exert due diligence when reporting. I'd like to thank Ms. Linda Bergeron, Madame Micheline Saint-Arnaud, and Ms. Josiane Leblanc for their long-standing work on this important issue. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Petitions, présentation de pétition, the Honourable Member for Windsor West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have two petitions to table. The first involves sports inquiry. There's over 700 petitioners have called for children and youth have the right to participate in sports in Canada without maltreatment, abuse, and harm. And the athletes are actually asking for the House of Commons to actually have a judicial inquiry of the sports system, and would also like to thank Victoria Parashak, Windsor professor, who is retired, for doing this across Canada. The second petition I have, Madam Speaker, revolves in terms of taxation in the United States. There's over 500 petitioners here who are affected by the tax rules with the Canada Revenue Agency and almost get double taxation. So they're calling upon the government of Canada to extend the commuters a full grant foreign tax credits for the withholdings, and also to make sure the CRA's 2020 temporary international income tax relief from Section 7 become permanent, and enact measures that the U.S. companies employing Canadian commuters are not required to hold separate Canadian payroll for their taxation, as it affects all of our economy. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Albert.
I rise today to present 12 petitions signed by residents of my constituency and surrounding communities. The first 7 petitions signed by 1,287 residents call upon the Parliament of Canada to stop the Liberal government's ban on hunting rifles. The next 4 petitions signed by 115 residents call upon the Government of Canada to delay its expansion of medical assistance in dying. The final petition, signed by 173 residents, call upon the Parliament of Canada to remove the Prime Minister and his government from office. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Mission Matsqui Fraser Canyon.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Today I'm pleased to table 3 petitions on behalf of constituents in Mission Matsqui Fraser Canyon. The first petition calls upon the government to repeal Bill C-21. Hunting has a long-standing history in Canada for both Indigenous and non-Indigenous Canadians, and needlessly revoking citizens' firearms erases and discounts our history and traditions. The second petition calls upon the government to do more to combat human trafficking. Petitioners are particularly displeased about the egregious action the Government of Canada took in Bill C-5, which reduced sentencing and allows for house arrests for the crime of human trafficking. They want to see that aspect of Bill C-5 repealed. The third petition I'm presenting today is calling upon the government to actually fulfill their commitment to allow for direct flights to Amritsar International by changes to the airport transport agreement. We know the Government of Canada recently made amendments to the ATA with India, but it didn't take that initial step of including Amritsar specifically in the agreement. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Griesbach.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and it's a pleasure to be able to table these petitions, in particular with your service as our Speaker at this moment. On behalf of Canadians who are calling for action on the opioid crisis, it's no secret to Canadians that the opioid crisis is one of the most deadly crises we're facing in Canada. Between the periods of January 2016 and March of 2020, over 30,000 Canadians died to the opioid epidemic. Mr. Speaker, these petitioners are calling for an end to the overdose crisis, to ensure that we have legal regulation of drugs, and to ensure that decriminalization of personal use, to end the stigma, to save lives, because, Mr. Speaker, we can't, in fact, treat those who are dead. The second petition that I'm standing on behalf of is calling on behalf of Canadians to call for a just transition legislation in the face of the climate emergency. It's no secret that the climate emergency is a serious issue here in Canada and across the world, and these petitioners are calling for action. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Kamloops Thompson Caribou.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's always a pleasure to rise on behalf of the people for Kamloops Thompson Caribou, and I obviously would like to welcome you to the chair as Speaker today. Mr. Speaker, it's a tremendous honor to rise today and present petition E4155 on behalf of the people from Kamloops Thompson Caribou. Mr. Speaker, this is a petition that advocates for a change to the Income Tax Act that would reflect community land trusts and beneficial tax interest for people who are donating land for the betterment of the community as a whole. This would be a game changer when it comes to donations and building for the benefit of all people in Kamloops, Thompson, Caribou, and throughout. I want to thank the person who has been behind this drive with the Kamloops Chamber of Commerce and Colin O'Leary. I also want to thank Acacia Pangelinen and Brian James with the Kamloops Chamber of Commerce. Thank them for their service, and it is an honor to table this petition. Given that Kamloops was the birthplace of the tax-free savings account, I hope that we can have something as significant as that. Thank you.
I'll remind members they're meant to stick to the words on the petitions in front of them. The Honourable Member for Spadina Fort York.
petition from many concerned citizens of Toronto who are extremely upset by Harbourfront Centre's lack of public consultation in undertaking repairs to a cultural landmark. Mr. Speaker, when Heritage Canada provided Harbourfront Centre with $20 million in repair and upgrade funding, it included the replacement of a much beloved and popular skating rink. However, from behind closed doors and without public consultation, the centre decided to rip up this landmark's community skating rink. The petitioners call upon the Government of Canada to review its financial commitment to Harbourfront and its obligations. They also want the government to advise the centre that has deviated from its initial goals and request the centre consult area residents on its new priorities, including maintaining a skating facility. Mr. Speaker, I thank the petitioners and especially Carol McCants for their hard work on this important issue. Harbourfront Centre should throw open its doors and listen to the voices of our community and the taxpayers who provided this $20 million.
I'll again remind members they're meant to stick to the words written on the petition from petitioners. The next petition from the member for Canada Carleton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I rise today to present two petitions from constituents in my riding. The first petition was signed by 25 constituents in my riding of Canada Carleton, and they would like to see the federal government do more to protect consumers, and as a result want to see consumers reflected in important policy, regulatory, and legislative decisions. To that end, the petitioners are calling on the government to establish an independent Canadian consumer advocate who is answerable to government. The second speaker I would like to present today is signed by 644 of my constituents on Canada's democratic process. The petitioners are a group of passionate high school students from Earl of March Secondary School, and these young people believe that youth possess the knowledge and experience to take part in the most important responsibility in a democracy, and that is voting in elections. In this petition, they call on the government to lower the minimum voting age to 16. Thank you very much for considering these petitions, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Vancouver East.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise to table a petition calling on the Government of Canada to urgently end the legislative poverty that 1.5 million disabled Canadians live with every day and establish a Canada disability benefit that upholds human rights and the UN Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Two Vancouver East constituents, Harris Taylor and Jan Nathanson, each spoke with their neighbours to gather signatures and show the deep support in our community for lifting all disabled people out of poverty immediately. I hope the government will heed their call and that all parties will work collaboratively together to swiftly establish an adequate benefit.
The honourable member for Renfrew, Nipissing, Pembroke.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I too have three petitions. The first is to ensure that C-21 does not get passed. It was the RCMP incompetence that led to punishing farmers and hunters. Then we have a request to condemn the unscientific mandates that kicked heroic members of the Canadian Armed Forces out after years of service because they were unable to take the shots, and an e-petition with over 1,000 signatures in support of the near-surface disposal facility at Chalk River Nuclear Labs.
The honourable member for Halifax.
Mr. Speaker, it's my honour to present a petition signed by over 800 Canadians from all 10 provinces and 3 territories. Initiated by the African Nova Scotian Decade of People of African Descent Coalition, the petitioners call upon the House of Commons to pass a resolution for the Government of Canada to apologize for Canada's role in the enslavement of African people and their descendants, create legislation recognizing Black Canadians as unique groups, and renew Canada's commitment to addressing the generational effects of enslavement, segregation, and systemic anti-Black racism. Mr. Speaker, the petitioners note that the UN has called for nations to acknowledge and apologize for the suffering and evils of the enslavement of African people, and as such, they urge the government to take action. Thank you.
The honourable member for Peace River Westlock.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to Mr. Speaker, the first petition I have to present today is from Canadians from across the country who celebrate the release of the Michaels from China. However, they want to raise the fact that there are still 115 Canadians still being detained in China, including Hussein Jalil, who's been detained for over 5,000 days. The Chinese government is refusing Mr. Chilil's Canadian citizenship. They're refusing to recognize it and are denying access to family, lawyers, and Canadian officials. They are calling on the government to demand the Chinese government to recognize Mr. Chilil's Canadian citizenship, provide him with consular service and legal services in accordance with international law, formally state the release of Mr. Chilil from Chinese detention and his return to Canada as a priority, appoint a special envoy to work on Mr. Chilil's release, and seek the assistance of the Americans and other allies around the world in obtaining Mr. Chilil's release. The next petition I have, Mr. Speaker, is from folks from across Canada who are concerned about the Defense Advisory Panel's report on systemic racism and discrimination in early 2022. This report calls for clergy from religious organizations to have a different view than the government on gender and sexuality, be banned as chaplains in the Canadian Armed Forces. This report slanders mainstream Canadian religions as discriminatory, misogynist, and sexist, and all Canadians, including the members of armed forces, are entitled to charter right guarantees of freedom of religion. Therefore, the undersigned of this petition call for a rejection of these recommendations, and affirm that to all Canadians, that including the armed forces, the right to freedom of religion. The next petition I have is.
We've got a number of members with petitions and 2 minutes left. If the member doesn't mind, we're going to switch to another petition, and if there's time left, he'll come back to complete the rest of his petitions. If the member doesn't mind being brief to accommodate other members, we have 2 minutes left for petitions. The Honourable Member for Peace River Westlock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The final petition I present today is from petitions from across Canada who are concerned about the Liberal Party's platform in 2021 denying the charitable status of organizations that have convictions about abortion which the Liberal Party disagrees with. This could jeopardize the charitable status of many hospitals, houses of worship, schools, homeless shelters, and other charitable organizations that do not agree with the Liberal Party on this matter for reasons of conscience. Therefore, the petitioners are calling for the government to protect and preserve the application of charitable status on a politically and ideological neutral basis without discrimination on the basis of political or religious views or the imposition of another values test, and to affirm the right of Canadians to freedom of expression. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The Honourable Member for Winnipeg North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have concerns that have been expressed to me personally, people that are genuinely and legitimately concerned about what's happening in Bangladesh today. Their concerns and allegations which may have been reported on in great detail, crackdowns on opposition political parties, critical intellectuals, news media, and journalists to shut their voice, take away citizen democratic rights, and forcefully remain in power in terms of the government. The government has also been accused of instituting a system of disappearance, forced disappearance, extrajudicial killings, false lawsuits, and all means of intimidation through its aligned forces and armed activists, dealing with issues such as corruption, rape, torture, killings, kidnapping, and other undemocratic actions beyond one's imagination. What they're really asking for is the House of Commons to review the human rights violations and undemocratic actions of what's happening in Bangladesh and take all possible measures to support democracy and human rights and justice. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Any remaining petitions to be presented? Seeing none. Questions on the order paper. The Honourable Member for Winnipeg North.
Mr. Speaker, the following questions will be answered today. Question 1246 to 1252. And then furthermore, Mr. Speaker, if the government's responses to questions number 1245 and 1253 could be made orders for return, these returns would be tabled immediately.
Is it the pleasure of the House for these documents to be transformed into orders for return and that they be tabled immediately? Agreed, and so ordered.
The Honourable Member for Winnipeg North.
Mr. Speaker, I would ask that all remaining questions be allowed to stand at this time, please.
Orders of the day.
Orders of the day, ordre du jour, government orders, government bills, comments, resuming consideration at second reading of Bill C-34, an act to amend the Investment Canada Act.
Resuming debate. La Chambre est prête à se prononcer.
Is the House ready for the question? The question is the following one. Mr. Champagne, seconded by Mr. Fraser, moved that Bill C-34, an act to amend the Investment Canada Act, be now read a second time and referred to the Standing Committee on Industry and Technology.
If a member of a recognized party present in the House wishes that the motion be carried or carried on division, or wishes to request a recorded division, I would invite them to rise and indicate it to the chair. The honourable member for South Shore St. Margaret.
Mr. Speaker, we would request a recorded division on Bill C-34.
Bring form, Rick. Bring. Yeah.
En conséquence, ce projet de loi est renvoyé.
This committee is deemed referred.
Conformément à l'ordre.
Pursuant to order made on Thursday, June 23, 2022, the division stands deferred until Monday, April 17, 2023, at the expiry of the time provided for oral questions.
The Honourable Deputy House Leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure if you canvass the House, you'll find unanimous consent to see the clock at the start of private members' business hour.
All those opposed to the Leader of the Government in the House of Commons moving this motion will please say nay.
D'accord.
Agreed.
La Chambre a entendu l'énoncé.
The House has heard the terms of the motion. All those opposed to the motion will please say nay.
Adopté.
Carried.
It being 12:41, the House will now proceed to the consideration of private members' business as listed on today's order paper.
Private members' business, consideration at second reading of Bill S-202, an act to amend the Parliament of Canada Act, Parliamentary Visual Artist Laureate, standing in the name of Mr. Aldag.
Mr. Aldag, appuyé par Mr. Fisher.
Mr. Aldag, seconded by Mr. Fisher, moved that Bill S-202, an act to amend the Parliament of Canada Act, Parliamentary Visual Artist Laureate, be now read a second time and referred to the Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage. Debate.
The Honourable Member for Cloverdale, Langley City.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is with great honour to rise today in the House and to speak to Bill S-202, an act to amend the Parliament of Canada Act, Parliamentary Visual Artist Laureate. This bill was first introduced and passed through the Senate by my good friend, Senator Patricia Bovey. I would also like to thank my friend and colleague, the MP for Bow River, for allowing me to take the lead at second reading of this bill. To provide some historical context, Bill S-202 was first introduced during the 42nd Parliament as Bill S-234 by Senator Wilfred Moore in 2016. It was adopted at all stages in the Senate before dying on the House of Commons order paper. It was subsequently reintroduced by Senator Bovey in the 43rd Parliament as S-210, and then again after prorogation as Bill S-205. When this previous rendition was introduced, former MP Ms. Lenore Zan acknowledged artist Peter Goh of Nova Scotia, who was the originator of this wonderful idea. Sadly, Peter passed away before he could see his idea become reality. I should mention that the House heard several wonderful speeches here when MPs debated S-205. It was clear that the House supported the bill, and it was very interesting to hear the importance of the arts from MPs of different parties. This bill has reached the House of Commons 3 times previously, and at various points has received unanimous support. The most recent time this bill was before the House was in the 43rd Parliament. On the day this bill was to be moved for the 3rd time, Parliament was dissolved, and now I'm able to bring this bill back again, hopefully for its final time, to see it through to its successful conclusion. Bill S-202 seeks to create the position of the Parliamentary Visual Artist Laureate. The Artist Laureate would be an officer of the Library of Parliament, similar to that of the Parliamentary Poet Laureate position. This position of Parliamentary Poet Laureate was created in 2001 through Bill S-10. which included similar amendments to the Parliament of Canada Act. Bill S10 gathered broad support from senators. In the House of Commons, S10 was supported by a majority of MPs. The selection process would consist of the Speaker of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of Commons acting together to select the Parliamentary Visual Artist Laureate from a list of 3 names reflective of Canada's diversity, including Indigenous representation. These names would then be submitted by a committee chaired by the Parliamentary Librarian and composed of the Director of the National Gallery of Canada, the Commissioner of Official Languages for Canada, the Chairperson of the Canada Council for the Arts, and the President of the Royal Canadian Academy of Arts or their designates. As for their tenure of office, the Parliamentary Visual Artist Laureate would hold office for a term not exceeding 2 years at the pleasure of the Speaker of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of Commons acting together. The mandate for this laureate position is to promote the visual arts in Canada through Parliament, including by fostering knowledge, enjoyment, awareness, and development of the arts. In carrying out their mandate, the laureate may produce or cause to be produced artistic creations at the request of either speaker, especially for use in Parliament on occasions of state. They may also sponsor artistic events such as art competitions or exhibitions. The laureate can also give advice to the parliamentary librarian regarding collection for the library and its acquisitions to enrich its current cultural holdings. In this bill, arts are defined as drawing, painting, sculpture, printmaking, design, crafts, photography, videography, and filmmaking.
Point of order, recognizing the member for Edmonton West.
Mr. Speaker, this being such an important private members bill, I think we should actually have quorum here for that.
It's clear we have quorum in the House. I would invite the member for Cloverdale Langley City to continue. Malpeck.
Mr. Speaker, I think someone in the official opposition referred to us as rats. I think that's pretty unparliamentary.
I did not hear that term. We'll have to check the Hansard for the use of that term.
Just a general reminder.
A general reminder to be respectful, particularly as we close out this week of Parliament. I'll return the floor to the member for Cloverdale Langley City.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And back to where I was, I'd like to reference that arts in this bill are defined as drawing, painting, sculpture, printmaking, design, crafts, photography, videography, and filmmaking. The contribution that Canadian artists make to our society and to our national identity cannot be understated. Art comes in all forms, and this legislation's definition of art broadly encompasses what the Artist Laureate will be focused on. Colleagues, these last 2 years have been a trying time for Canadians. As we struggled through COVID, many of us turned to the arts to cope with loneliness, fear, and anxiety, which came with the pandemic. The arts provided a respite during this time and continue to do so. We should keep in mind that Canada's arts community suffered these same symptoms but continue to produce their works for us to enjoy. We should also keep in mind that the economic downturn affected our cultural community in quite a drastic manner. According to Hill Strategies research, between 2019 and 2020, over half the businesses and organizations in the arts, entertainment, and recreation sector saw a 50% reverse revenue loss. Performing arts and festivals lost over half of their revenues and a loss of some 35% of total jobs during that period. But the arts are resurgent and have been recovering slowly but surely. Canada's government has been there for the sector and will continue to do so. Canada needs a strong and vibrant arts sector. Part of the power of the arts is its way of breaking down barriers between people. Canada is a multicultural country, and art provides a creative outlet to help us understand each other. Artistic expression can be understood without the use of words, and this gives us the ability to learn and understand stories and perspectives across linguistic barriers. As Senator Bovey put it, and I quote, "Artists have always depicted or discussed contemporary issues in their work and drawn attention to critical concerns. It is clear, for instance, that understanding each other will play a key role in reconciliation for which cultural understanding is essential." End of quote. Mr. Speaker, allow me to take a moment now to explain why art is so important to myself and my constituents. There's a rich art scene in my riding of Cloverdale-Langley City who are sure to be excited about this amendment to the Parliament Act. I want to bring attention to Luce Leaf Fournier's mural work titled "The Sunshine Circle" for bringing community together. I also want to recognize Councillor Rosemary Wallace for creating an entirely free event called Arts Alive, which proves to be a very impactful experience of artists coming together to share, inspire, and connect each year in Langley City. In addition to the specific Cloverdale and Langley City art examples just mentioned, Surrey overall has a history of being a community that supports its artists. In 1964, the Surrey Art Society advocated for a Centre for the Arts in Surrey. The proposal was to build a space that would not only showcase the artistic talent in Surrey, but also give space for artists and performers to learn and hone their talents. The Surrey Art Gallery is built and is an important art space in Surrey. Additionally, the Arts Council of Surrey operates every day out of a repurposed fire hall, and this further reinforces the history that the Arts Council has with the Surrey community. But isn't this the power of art and creativity? The Arts Council of Surrey took an old building and gave it new life as a safe place for artists to express themselves in their own community. They've had markets for artisans and Indigenous artists to sell their arts and crafts. This is just one example of how the arts is an integral part of Surrey. I hope this demonstrates how legislation like that before us today, now more than ever, is so important. This past year, I had the pleasure of meeting Sandy Diamond. She had her first exhibition at the Arts Gallery of Surrey, Art Gallery of Surrey's gallery. Sandy only recently started painting after she retired from training horses professionally. It was something she always played around with, but after she had some time in her hands, she finally picked up the brush full-time. Sandy paints beautifully, and her art ranges from trains, making their way through the Canadian landscape, to horses that she used to train, to the amazing landscapes, and I personally love her painting of trees. The gallery showing was fantastic. When Sandy reached out to my office with an invitation, she didn't know if I would come. I hadn't met Sandy before, but the arts were important to her, and she wanted that shared with everyone. What she didn't know was how important the arts are to me and my family. There were many that showed up to her gallery showing, her exhibition, including myself, but also the Mayor of Langley City, members of the Fraser Valley Heritage Railway, and local media. This just shows again, Madam Speaker, how important the arts are to Cloverdale-Langley City. The creation of a Parliamentary Artist Laureate builds on the government's support for the arts since 2015. The Parliamentary Visual Artist Laureate would complement these commitments by creating an opportunity to celebrate Canadian visual arts and artists and projecting I don't know what that is.
Must know that that is very, very disturbing for the interpreters. Please have no phones.
Continuing on, our Parliamentary Visual Artist Laureate would complement these commitments by creating an opportunity to celebrate Canadian visual arts and artists and projecting a global image of open-mindedness, creativity, and innovation. Canadian artists from across the country, whether they be lifelong Canadians, immigrants, or Indigenous peoples, will benefit from having a Parliamentary Artist Laureate here in Ottawa. The appreciation of the arts unites us, and in a multicultural country such as Canada, we should be promoting our many different forms of art at every given opportunity. In summary, Madam Speaker, supporting Bill S-202 recognizes the importance of visual arts to the Canadian creative economy, supports diverse artistic expression by Canadian artists, raises the profile of Canadian visual arts in Canada and abroad, and demonstrates that the government values the contributions made by contemporary Canadian visual artists. I look forward to the discussion we'll have here today, and I am hopeful that Bill S-202 will receive support from all parties represented here in the House of Commons. Please join me in celebrating the arts in our country. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires, l'honorable député de Joliette.
The honourable member for Joliette. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'd like to thank my colleague for his speech. Extremely interesting. He reminded us that there was a similar bill. There have been similar bills debated in the House but that it had never gotten to the end of the process to be passed. Can the honourable member tell us if his government intends to trigger elections before the fall?
De Langley City.
Well, I'd like to thank my colleague from across the way for that excellent question. It is another great opportunity to be able to talk about the importance of arts in our country and the support that our government gives to the artistic community. We've seen many investments made, particularly during the pandemic, but through pandemic recovery. And I'm sure that we're going to see, through the support of this House, this legislation finally implemented, and therefore we can then have a visual arts laureate that will help further celebrate the arts within Canada. And thank you for that question.
Comments, questions et commentaires. The honourable member for Nunavut.
And I'd like to thank the member for his intervention. I wonder if, given that Canada is founded on Indigenous peoples' lands, if this bill does pass, that maybe the first laureate should be Indigenous, if he agrees.
The honourable member for Cloverdale Langley City.
Great. I'd like to thank my colleague, and I do have the opportunity of working with her on the Indigenous Affairs Committee, and although I'm new to it, it's been wonderful getting to know her and her passion for Indigenous communities, the Indigenous peoples in our country. As I noted in the speech, it would be important to have the diversity of our country, and that includes Indigenous artists. And so the selection committee would be pulling from a diversity of artists within the country. And although I wouldn't be part of that selection committee myself, I would strongly hope that there would be an Indigenous visual arts artist laureate, and perhaps that could be the first one. So it's a wonderful suggestion and something for the eventual selection committee to consider.
Questions and comments, questions et commentaires. The honourable member for Châteauguay-Lacolle.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I'd like to thank my honourable colleague for his work on this bill, especially because it's been already 2 times that we've tried to have it passed. I'd like to ask him to talk a bit about what influence the person who plays this role, or who takes this position, what role they would play in helping to inspire young people.
Cloverdale Langley City.
Yeah, I'd like to thank my colleague for that excellent question. And we had spoken previously about this legislation, and she has a family member who is a visual artist, and so I appreciate all of her support for this. I think that the intent of the position would be to create and curate art exhibitions and to bring forward the diversity within our country. And so I think the engagement with young people across the realm of cultures, including, as we heard previously, Indigenous artists, would be so important to highlight the amazing diversity that we have in this country, and really engaging young artists, aspiring artists. It can be a tough world, and I spoke in my comments about some of the challenges that artists have had during the pandemic and the recovery, but it's always been a bit of a challenging world. I hear that from artists all the time, and so I think that the importance of this position is to help bring attention every day to visual artists and not only the struggles but the successes that they have, and I would hope that would involve young Canadians as well. Thank you.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for Saskatoon Westwood.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Good day, everyone. It's a pleasure to rise in the House this afternoon to talk about the bill S-202, an act to amend the Parliament of Canada Act, better known as the Parliamentary Visual Artist Laureate. This Senate bill, as you all know, proposes to establish a new officer of the Library of Parliament called the Parliamentary Visual Artist Laureate, and to give that position a term of up to 2 years. This new officer would be tasked with creating works of arts for Parliament and engaging with visual arts communities from coast to coast. The Parliamentary Budget Officer assumes the overall cost of a visual artist laureate will be in the neighborhood of $100,000. This is based on the cost of the already established Parliamentary Poet Laureate position that we have. I and my Conservative colleagues support the arts in this country, the culture and the diverse heritage of Canada, and through my work the past 8 years on the Canadian Heritage Committee, I've had many opportunities to learn from Canadians and demonstrate that support. My colleagues on this side of the House and I on the Heritage Committee have heard many witnesses testify from the arts community who are struggling financially, and we've made common sense suggestions to the government legislation to support these artists in our country. Unfortunately, though, I've been disappointed by the lack of support by this Liberal government for the online content creators who, Madam Chair, let's make no mistake, are really artists themselves. So Bill C-11 threatened some of these artists, and no amount of testimony or discussion has caused the government to even give this issue a second look. This is an avoidable mistake, Madam Speaker. We heard many artists come to committee to talk about the online streaming bill that gave them the opportunity to connect not only in their community, not only in this country of Canada, but worldwide. These are the same artists and creators that have made a name for themselves but are now being censored, and this government moved closure last night on Bill C-11. Even the Senate agreed when they looked over the bill for months. C-11, they recommended 26 amendments. This was a huge issue in the Red Chamber. The government refused 8 amendments which dealt with censorship. These are artists who may never have a chance at making $100,000 a year. But like the Senate bill, it's all about freedom of expression. It's interesting that S-202 doesn't refer to it, because when they were studying another creative bill, it was all about limiting the freedom of expression. So with regard to this legislation, Bill S-202, I will remain optimistic and open-minded. I will listen to members who will no doubt deliver thoughtful remarks, and I will listen to all Canadians. But, Madam Speaker, I will remind everyone it is Canadians who will bear the brunt of the cost of this bill, and I will listen closely to hear their thoughtful views. Madam Speaker, I regularly send information into my riding requesting feedback. I am never disappointed by the range of opinions and carefully considered comments that we get back. I learn something every time, actually, we send out a mailer and interact with our constituents. Canadians, as we all know, are very smart, and I trust them to make very good decisions about how we spend their money here in Parliament. We will get that opportunity to hear from Canadians when this bill goes to committee. We will hear from witnesses and gather more information. For an example, was there a demand for the creation of this position in the first place? And what work is expected to be produced by this individual in this position? How would this individual be selected? Would the work produced reflect Canadian values that we can be proud of? Is there any limitations on their work? See, some of the questions we're talking about here today is what we need to find out in committee. These are just a few important considerations. Canada, as we all know, is rich in talent in every artistic field. I've been privileged to travel to every coast of this country, and I can tell you, Canadians are creating art every day in every way across this great country. My office in Saskatoon, in fact, is decorated with meaningful art pieces from talented Canadians, including my own wife, Anne. The late Bob Pitzel from Humboldt has a number of paintings that I cherish in Saskatoon and here in the Ottawa office. Anne and I have supported artists for years, buying their treasures, helping out nonprofit organizations like Artists Against Hunger as they raise money for local charities in our city of Saskatoon. There is no shortage of creativity and talent, like I said, in Canada. In fact, I had an opportunity to visit Stornoway just before Christmas, and that, of course, is the resident of the leader of the opposition. And I was pleased to see on the wall a painting from the late Alan Sapp, an artist from Saskatchewan. And it was one of the paintings from his catalog that actually I tried to purchase for myself had it been available, and there I see it on the wall of the opposition at Stornoway. Did you take it? So I guess I can't take that picture back home with me. But you see, Alan Sapp, who passed away unfortunately in 2015, is an Indigenous artist back then, and he really set the table in our province for art. In fact, if you go to the city of North Battleford, there is a museum that I think all Canadians should go through. Alan Sapp was one of the finest painters that this country has ever seen. So could a collection of artists who are already creating art contribute their work in order to fulfill the goal of this bill, S-202? I just throw that out there. These are options that we might consider before creating a new and executive post. This bill proposes mandating a visual artist laureate to promote arts here in Canada. Madam Speaker, Canadians have been doing this since the birth of this nation, some 150 plus years without even a mandate. Art is an amazing thing. Creativity does not need to be mandated. COVID was particularly difficult, I think, for artists in this country. It was difficult for everyone, but certainly that area of artists. They could not show their work, and it was very tough on them. But we heard from them at Heritage Committee. This is a sector that I would like to hear from on the idea of a visual arts laureate. They will provide a level of understanding that should be heard. When the reckless spending and the runaway debt under this current government, it makes sense to hear from Canadians and see what they want. Do they feel this is value for money, or do they have other priorities for the arts funding in this country? Is this the best way to support artists in Canada? And is this the best time to create new expenses in this country? I would like to thank my honourable colleague from the other place, the senator from Manitoba, for this bill. I think we can all agree that members support in this House the arts and culture and diversity. There are many ways to support that priority in Canada. Madam Speaker, in closing, I would just like to thank some of the artists from my city, the late Hugo Alvarado, along with Cam Forrester, who has had a group in our city, Men Who Paint. They have several exhibitions. They're a fabulous group of artists in Saskatoon. They do tremendous work and volunteer their time for workshops which help, I think, younger artists to get involved. Cheryl Tuchtalan, Ernie Scholes, Indigenous. He does so much in our city, volunteering items for promotion at fundraising events. Lorna Lamuth, Laurel Shinstead-Smith, Marion Phaneuf. I could go on and on. Madam Speaker, thank you for your time on S-202.
Resuming debate, the Honourable Member for Saint-Jean. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I am pleased to rise today on the last Friday before the breaks on Bill S-202, which would create an official Parliamentary Visual Artist Laureate role. I want to draw some parallels with something we already know, which is similar, that our colleagues have already mentioned, the role of Poet Laureate, and I will refer to speeches from 2001 when that role was created, and I will contrast and compare. So there were a few concerns raised by the Bloc Québécois at the time of the creation of the role of the poet laureate. There's a language issue because a poem can't be rendered in the same way in its original language and a translation. Even though we say here there are two official languages here, we jokingly say English and simultaneous translation. Aside from the fact that with visual art we wouldn't see a language issue, the role that will be created doesn't have the same scope. With the poet would be asked to try to express the rhythm of Parliament in a poetic way. That is quite the ask to put art in the work we do. But it was something to be asked of the poet, that they would write poems to be read in the House and at official events. The role of the artist will be a little bit different. Yes, the artist can create works, but also commission works, sponsor artistic events, and advise the parliamentary librarian regarding the acquisition of works, and do other related tasks at the request of the House or the Senate. So the role of the future visual artist laureate is a little bit different from the poet laureate. But the nature of the art to be expressed is different. When we talk about poetry, it's a little bit more limited. But here, with visual art, we could have drawing, painting, sculpture, etching, design, photography, videography, cinema, and more. So the medium used by the artist is a lot broader than words, which is the case for the poet laureate. Our Conservative colleague mentioned regarding costs for us, it's not a problem. $100,000 a year, while the Parliamentary Visual Artist Laureate will be much better value than, for example, the Governor General, just to name an example. So in the Bloc's opinion, there's not really an issue regarding the cost to taxpayers for the production of work. And we hope they will be sources of inspiration for everyone. However, there are a few things that could bother me a little bit about the creation of the role. If art can be a very effective political weapon, and so I would hope that there won't be politicization of the role of the visual artist laureate. We don't want there to be a mandate to politicize art, and we hope that the artist will have as much latitude as possible in their work. Another thing I'd like to express regarding the work of the artist is that if the art is to reflect the diversity of Canada, I hope that in that diversity we won't forget that there's a francophone minority outside Quebec, and that Quebec itself is a francophone minority within Canada, which is part of Canadian diversity. So we hope that will be reflected in the artist's work. When I talked about politicization of art, I'll give an example. In December of last year, there was a discussion in the House about the role of the Fine Art Museum in decolonizing art, so that during the Iriopel year, there wasn't going to be an exhibit on that artist. So when I'm talking about politicization of art, that's what I hope not to see with the role of the Visual Artist Laureate. And then I talked about the freedom of the artist. I'd like to mention a speech by Madeleine Dalphond-Guiral, who spoke about the creation of the poet role. And it seems that it's the speech that made the member from Montarville laugh in the House. So I hope to go look for the video one day of this speech, but I'll read a more serious portion. So Madeleine Dalphond-Guiral said, "The second question is the one that concerns me the most. Is freedom the poet's most precious possession? I know that for me, freedom is what's most precious, and there is no shortage of examples of people who have chosen to die for freedom. What about poets? Some of the greatest have languished in prison to defend freedom. Imprisoned, they were no less free. Who can name a single poet who would have been willing to trade freedom for money or power? Honestly, I can't think of any. It is true that Bill S-10 would give the poet laureate the onerous responsibility of writing poems that would be read in Parliament at official ceremonies. Does this mean that official means non-partisan? It may well be. But how can we not imagine that being promoted to the position of parliamentary poet laureate for 2 years will not have, as a consequence, the obligation of creating obstacles that will limit one's subsequent speech and give it a serious bias? How to be free when the choice of the poet laureate will be the result of a decision taken at the suggestion of a few people, some of whom are appointed as a result of political appointments. As the popular saying goes, don't bite the hand that feeds you. So I hope that the artist will never have an express imposition or even an implicit mandate that would limit freedom. But there are good things in the creation of the role. During the pandemic, when artists had a difficult time, and I'll give a few examples here, it's a good thing to promote the work of artists. We know during the pandemic, many cultural events were canceled, exhibit spaces were limited or closed to the public. There were issues related to funding for artists, and there was a lot of psychological distress with artists who were not able to work and to earn a living. So artists often have much lower income than others. Many live under the poverty line, and there's a power dynamic between broadcasters and artists. There's a lot of financial precarity that was growing worse even before the pandemic. Maybe we lost that will to support the arts. So with that instability, financial instability for artists, I think this bill sends the right message to artists. I only hope that it's not the only one, and that funding of the arts is never a partisan issue in this House. Though perhaps that's just wishful thinking. So the creation of this role is a good thing, and what could be the impact on the House? And I'd like
in my speeches in this chambers. As I say, "Uqaqtitiyi," all the time, people still ask me, what does that mean? "Uqaqtitiyi" means the one who gives space to speak. The term has no gender attached to it, so when I say it, I don't need to worry if it is the member for Algoma, Manitoulin, Kapuskasing, or the member for West Nova, or even the member for Brassard St. Lambert is sitting at the chambers, at the chair. To get back to Bill S-202, visual arts are an important expression of identity, individually and collectively. For individual artists who are lucky enough to have the talent and skills, they express any and all of the emotions that those of us are less talented and wish we could express. Indeed, I share gratitude for their talents. The collective identity comes from different backgrounds. Predictably, I will speak to the Inuit and Indigenous contributions to Canada's national identity. The contributions by Inuit and Indigenous visual artists to Canada's collective identity are vast and expansive. I have only to mention Qinuyuaq, or as non-Inuit would say her name, Qinuyuaq Ashivek. If I say her name, you can imagine the beautiful owl prints that are so commonly sold in museums today. Qinuyuaq was said to have been born on October 3, 1927. She died on January 8, 2013. Qinuyuaq was born in an igloo at a camp called Ikitsaraq at the southern coast of Baffin Island. In the 1950s, Qinuyuaq was sent to a hospital in Quebec City against her will, having tested positive for tuberculosis. Because of the adversity and the strength that she had, Qinuyuaq became an icon for sharing her talents. When I mention Jermaine Ang Naktayuk, you can imagine the design on the iconic $2 coin that was issued by the Royal Canadian Mint in 1999. Jermaine showcases the beauty of Inuit in her artwork. Jermaine is an Inuk, and she has illustrated several books, and I am inspired by her as she always expresses the strength of Inuit in her works. I love the artwork of Tanya Tagaq. She is more well known as a modern throat singer, which is just as powerful as her visual art. The last time I watched Tanya perform, I had goosebumps. When I read her book, Split Tooth, I felt surrounded by her enthralling expressions. I look up to her for her courage and for being an Inuk warrior. Blake Anakinab is a talented Anishinaabe artist who was commissioned by Google. Blake worked with Danielle Morrison, who commemorated the great works by Norval Morrisseau. Thinking of Norval always reminds me of discovering the use of his works in the iconic movie The Shining. Blake, by the way, has a great collection of works available on his website, including a description of Moving Forward Together, which Bimbo Canada has committed over 5 years with the Downey Wenjack Fund. The website says, and I quote, "As a legacy space to build cultural understanding and connections and a path to reconciliation between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples." Another great visual artist is Christy Belcourt, a Métis visual artist who is best known for her acrylic paintings. Christy is an amazing activist. Through her works, she leads us to do better for our environment. I love particularly she worked in solidarity with Inuit hunters from Pond Inlet and Arctic Bay and created Respect Inuit or Leave. This work was particularly important as it helped contribute to the protection of Inuit rights and values to protect the environment and wildlife surrounding Baffinland Iron Ore's proposal to expand its Mary River Iron Ore project, which is having a targeted impact on 5 communities in the Qikiqtani region. COVID-19 left such a huge impact on Canada and the world. Many artists were particularly impacted. According to Hill Strategies research in October 2021, there was a 25% decrease in employment levels, including self-employment in the arts, entertainment, and recreation was higher than any other industry in 2020. Yet, COVID-19 showed us just how important visual art was, as we all turned to Zoom and Teams and other software to join in meetings. We all became purposive in what we would show as our background. At one point, I remember specifically wanting to showcase the beautiful artwork of Madeleine Kumwaktok as she uses her surroundings to express her works, including the beautiful tundra she is surrounded by in Pangnaktok. If Bill S-202 passes, we must ensure that when the House of Commons Speaker and the Speaker of the Senate acting together select the parliamentary visual artists laureates that are Indigenous. Canada enjoys its diversity because of Indigenous peoples. Canada enjoys its diversity on Indigenous peoples' lands. Canada must express its commitment to ongoing reconciliation by ensuring that among its first parliamentary visual artist laureates will be Inuit, Métis, and First Nations.
The Honourable Member for Longueuil, Charlemagne.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Before I start my speech, I just want to make sure or reassure the member for Joliette that we're not going into an election this year.
Donc, Madame la Présidente, je me lève aujourd'hui.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to express my support for Bill S-202, an act to amend the Parliament of Canada Act, Parliamentary Visual Artist Laureate. This is a bill which recognizes that we are doing our best as legislators when we are informed by many types of knowledge, and that this essential foundation for reflection and understanding, which is represented by our Library of Parliament, includes visual arts. As an official representative of the Library of Parliament, the official visual artist or visual artist laureate will create works of art, organize events, and enrich the library's collection while promoting art in Canada. And as our poet laureate, who can condense vast revelations into tiny constellations of carefully chosen words, an official visual artist, through their creation, can offer not only new ways of seeing things, but also new things to see. And we definitely need new ways of seeing things right now.
Serving Canadians in Parliament over the course of the COVID-19 pandemic, and the experience has allowed me to confirm on a large scale many of the ideas I have long held about the people living across this country. Their resilience, their stamina, their care for one another, and their incredible hard work. I've also seen some breathtaking reminders of Canadians' imagination and creativity. Extraordinary artwork that has revitalized our hopes, enlivened our thinking, and allowed us to remain connected to our common humanity despite the distance between us. Bien que mon objectif ne soit absolument...
My intent is not to minimize the pain of separation and isolation that many Canadians experienced during the first months of the pandemic. Far from it. I did, however, have the pleasure of meeting many times people who established deep connections between them, which can't be summarized by being in the same place at the same time. We saw that when we communicate what we really care about And today we have many ways of communicating these thoughts and feelings. Some choose new technology. This technology has reached heights we never would have believed possible before the pandemic. But many people choose to do it differently. For example, communicating via letter is very different from a live conversation between two people. In the same way, the arts represent a magnificent language to express oneself and show others what gives meaning to our lives. It's also a powerful way to examine important questions at the heart of our experience. It's an extremely effective tool to understand and resist the tumultuous time that we live in and imagine a better world.
That Canadian artists can offer are not bound by the constraints of literal eyesight. Take Bruce Horek, for example, a Calgary-born visual and performing artist. He had a cancer in childhood that took most of his eyesight. Since then, he has been legally blind. Speaking of his journey to painting in one of a series of interviews with artists from the disability arts movement, presented by Tangled Art Plus Disability and the Art Gallery of Ontario, Mr. Horek said, and I quote, "People would ask me how I see, how I'm able to do what I do with 9% vision. So I started painting portraits to try to capture the way I see the world. That includes auras and halos and floaters and a lot of distortions. I painted a portrait a day for a full year and really enjoyed the connection that happened between myself and my subject," end quote. Since beginning this project in 2011, Madam Speaker, he has painted over 600 individual portraits from live and virtual sessions, giving his subjects the opportunity to see themselves in a new way. Similarly, the Visual Artist Laureate could facilitate more of these perceptual transformations, changing how Canadians see themselves and demonstrating the inherent richness that every different way of seeing brings to our collective. That richness has so often been squandered whenever different ways of seeing have been shut out, cut down, or marginalized. We lawmakers must take action to see our country's problems from other perspectives. Our vision captures only a pinhole of the bigger picture. For us to make just laws, we must work harder at seeing everyone and everything as they truly are. In an inspiring artwork from 2019, Montreal artist Michael Sergil used Maya Angelou's voice, reciting The Mask, a mashup of We Wear the Mask by Paul Laurence Dunbar, a 19th century black poet, and Angelou's own poem for old black men, to translate sound into something visible and tactile and entirely new. The sound waves of Angelou's masterful and devastating performance of this piece, which speaks to the pain and injustice black people have had to mask with laughter, is mapped with a spectrograph into a visual pattern, which is then transformed again into something new and richly layered by weaving that pattern into a black and white mix of cotton, alpaca, and acrylic. These broad shawl-like ribbons of Maya Angelou's voice in fabric, cascading down the gallery wall. How would it change us if we could literally wrap the sound of those words around our shoulders? Un artiste visuel officiel pourrait permettre.
A visual artist laureate can expand the portal to transformative experiences like these, not just for legislators, but for all Canadians. When Gabriel Roy, one of the most celebrated authors of 20th century French-Canadian literature, asks, "Would we know ourselves even a little without the arts?" She reminds us that parts of us are only accessible through detours, through metaphors, representations, through poetry and art. No matter how many people we share our time and space with, we live most of our lives inside our own heads. I would never call this place a small space. Our inner world is like an ocean, with a multitude of unseen and mysterious spaces. But even though most of us know the way to the shores of these waters, we're not comfortable spending time on the other side of the sandbar, beyond where our feet can touch the bottom, alone, in the underwater depths, under pressure, in the unfathomable valleys of our being. Yet, it is in these strange and isolated places that artists create most of their work, and in doing so, allow us to escape, if only for a brief moment, from the confines of our consciousness, and see life through the eyes of another person in order to connect the submerged continents of one person's way of being to another. Madam Speaker, we must take every opportunity available to enjoy the discoveries made by these introspective expeditions and acknowledge the courage of artists who resist the pressure to avoid diving into the depths of their being. We must examine, with courage and curiosity, both the treasures and the wrecks they bring to the surface, and better understand who we are and where we come from. We must pass Bill S-202 and create an official visual artist laureate. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Edmonton West, who will have about 5 minutes at this time for the speech.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and appreciate the opportunity to speak this day. And I want to thank my colleagues today. There was a lot of real heartfelt speeches. I really appreciate, I've asked the member before about when she opens her remarks, and it was hilarious. It was a great story about the general neutrality of it. So I want to say thank you and thank my colleague today for some really great heartfelt speeches. I hope we could actually see that in other speeches, just not from my own going forward. Now, I have limited time today, so I want to talk about some of the great events going on in my own city around art. But before I do wish to point out that when we look at the Treasury Board contributions page for grants to the arts and culture, Alberta and Edmonton per capita are receiving far less than other provinces. And I hope that this government will take a serious look at that and provide equal funding to the arts based on per capita. One of the programs we support is the Edmonton Opera. They do phenomenal work, provide a lot of jobs in the arts and culture industry, but we see it's struggled for Alberta organizations to receive federal funding. So I hope the government will address that. Now, I know my time is very short, but I just want to talk about some of the things going on in Edmonton right now. People like to make fun of Edmonton, call it Dedmonton. We actually have a coffee called Dedmonton Coffee. But they think it's kind of a backward for arts and culture, but I think people would be surprised at what goes on in our city. We are called the festival city for a reason with all the events going on this summer. But I just want to point out, like this week alone, I'm going to read out some of the things going on in Edmonton to do with visual arts. We have the paint night with the red pepper. It's painting parties, and that's at the Anvil Coffee House in the Otwell area. We have sip and paint night with vinyology art, which should be great because my wife is in the wine business, and being in politics, I'm in the wine drinking business. So that's at the Stanhope Eatery just off of the White Mud. We have the Weekend with Model at Harcourt House going on. Again, this is all in just one weekend in Edmonton. We have paint night with the Pub and Paint at the Western Barcode. And I want to bring out this bar, specifically this location, Western Barcode, because it's in my riding. And for people in Edmonton looking for something to do, it's at 20130 Lessard Road. So free plug for the Western Barcode in my riding. There's paint night in the Secret Garden and brew at the Bloom Cafe going on. And a great one at Pure Casino, and I love this one, the Art Battle, Edmonton. Described as 12 artists, 3 rounds, 1 champion. It sounds like some artist Lord of the Flies type event, so I'll look forward to going to that. As well, actually going on tonight, if Air Canada actually obliges me, which I'm doubting because they've delayed me twice. It looks like I'm missing my connecting flight. Tonight at Gallery 23 at the Dinwiddie Lounge near the University of Alberta, there's a formal dress, music, art, and research event. So we see that this is, again, just one small capsule of time in Edmonton is an amazing amount, and this is just in painting. We have Edmonton as a flourishing visual arts district, community as well, whether it's video games, production, YouTube production. There's lots of events, and I'm glad that the bill brought up this opportunity to perhaps celebrate and grow the arts industry. And again, I hope that we can approach the arts and culture funding in Alberta, and I'm probably sure in the other Western provinces, from a more fair and equitable funding process, so that arts and culture in Alberta, and especially in Edmonton and Edmonton West, where it's more important than the other areas, is treated fairly and treated equally as if they were perhaps in downtown Toronto, Vancouver. The jobs that they create in Edmonton and Alberta are just as important as the jobs created in the rest of the country, and just as important to the people of Edmonton as they are to other countries. Madam Speaker, thank you very much.
The honourable member will have 5 minutes to complete his speech when the bill will come back for a study. The time provided for the consideration of private members' business has now expired, and the order is dropped to the bottom of the order of precedence on the order paper. Comme il est 13h40.
As it is 1:41, the House is adjourned until April 23, 11 a.m., pursuant to the relevant standing orders. Happy Easter.